And that's why it's such a great honor to be here tonight to honor her once again. Now, a lot of you probably know Mary, and she's a legend in town, and it's so great that Susan is here tonight, and Diane is here tonight, and their husbands are here tonight, and last year's winner, Ed Hart, is here tonight, and that makes it very, very special. You know, Mary was a legend in this town. The many years that she spent with Mark on the Board of Health is, 30 years, right?
Very much so.
Very much so. And she, working with the schools, working with the fire department, there's no better person to have this award named after. And it's an honor, like I said, this will be the last time I'll get to stand in front of you and give this presentation, so it means a lot to me tonight to do it. And with that, Janet, you're here tonight. Why don't you come up and join us? I'm pretty sure everybody in the room might know who you are. And we're here to honor Janet for her role in helping the town. I mean, public service is the most important thing I think that happens in this town. And we want to thank you for it. We want to recognize you. It's nice to see so many of your friends and family here tonight. You should run for office or something. You'd probably win in a landslide. You know, there's a seat open on the Board of Health. But with that, we want to give you a proclamation, and you will forever be listed on the plaque in Ashland Town Hall as the second person to win the Mary Mortensen Award. So whereas the Ashland Board of Health, in honor of our longtime Board of Health member, Mary Penny Mortensen, have established an annual award in her name, and whereas the Ashland Board of Health will present the Mary Mortensen Public Health Award to a deserving community member by nominating and a vote of the board, and whereas Janet Gamache, a 21-year resident of Ashland and a 15-year member of the Volunteer for Green Up Ashland Committee, you have to work with Mark for 15 years, that's good, was essential in her commitment to service as a Green Up Ashland Committee member, and whereas Janet Gamache, together with her loyal service dog, Lydia, which she didn't bring tonight, has made hundreds of visits to area nursing homes, schools, and libraries, forming relationships with residents of all ages. Whereas Janet, through her many years of public service and dedication to the wellness and beautification of the community, exemplifies how the art of volunteerism can make a difference in a community. And whereas, now therefore, we, the Board of Health for the town of Ashland, do hereby recognize you and honor Janet as this year's recipient of the Mary Mortensen Public Health Award. We urge all residents to make known their appreciation for Janet's devotion to the town of Ashland. We wish you good health and forever fortune. Thank you. Board, do you want to say anything to Janet?
Thank you for your service, and should please continue with that.
Great job.
Congratulations. Thank you, Jim.
Want to get a couple pictures? I think your husband's got something there for you. Her husband, Paul. All right, Paul, you're a smart man in the room right there. Why don't you come and get a picture? Oh, okay. Well, we get one with the whole board.
No, it's okay.
You guys want to all jump in?
You're one.
I think I should.
Yep. Oh, okay. You gotta get it?
That's okay. It's crowded.
Okay, so the
It's a good luck sign, is it?
the chair asked me to plug Green Up Ashland. Many of you people might know about it. Some of you worked at it, including one of our selectmen I'm seeing right here. It's a great event, and what it does, it gets businesses, the community, and the schools together to clean up the town, celebrate environmental awareness. We're trying to do it always on Earth Day, but to save money, Janet, you might have mentioned this, is that we would choose the first Saturday in May. So all our lawn signs say the first Saturday in May, which this year, I believe, is May 4th. Is that correct? Does someone have a calendar in front of them? And thank you. And we get together at the Stone Park Pavilion, and people can arrive anywhere from 8:30 onward, and we stay there till noontime. And it's a community event and commitment for many people, including our DPW, our police reserve forces, and many others that I probably will forget. Even the fact that the pavilion's being gifted to us that day, we thank the Ashland Day Committee for that. So it's a great event. Hope to see some of you if you're from town. Janet, you're going to be there. You promised, right? Even though you're leaving, you promised. And hope to see you there. Thank you.
Nice job, Mark. Miles, you want to take a quick 5-minute break?
Move that we have a recess for 5 minutes.
right, we will reconvene this Tuesday, April 2nd, 2019 Board of Health meeting. By my watch, about 7:20. We just came from our second annual Mary Mortensen Public Health Award and honored Janet Gamache for her award. And it was nice to see how many friends and family came in. Does the board have any quick comments on it?
It's a good gathering.
Yeah.
I guess we get this kind of gathering every time with good news.
Yeah.
We should do it more often.
Yeah, we should do it more often. You know, one thing that I failed to mention, and I think it's probably, it might be she was awarded Bus Driver of the Year this past year. And I was just talking with the town manager. That's not an easy job. Not an easy job, so congratulations to her. With that, we delayed a legend in speaking here tonight for citizens' participation. I know he probably has a couple words.
You know him, you love him.
You can't be without them. Okay. Good evening.
How are you?
Mark Tassoni, legend in his own mind with citizens always in mind. Great award ceremony that was, from the person it's named for to the person who did get it. I would like to thank everybody in town because spring has finally sprung all around. It's gonna be good, how it should. So that's being all around town.
Nipsey Russell all of a sudden.
I know, well, he steps it up for our board.
Yeah. Are you working for Hallmark now? That was good, Mark. Thank you for that. Thank you with that.
Mark Tassoni will be doing his one-man play about Nipsey Russell.
All right, well, we will move to item 4 on the agenda, the nomination of our animal inspector, Sophie Schulman. Mr. Orm?
And our 2 animal inspectors for this year are here in animal control. They serve both the purpose of animal inspector for the Board of Health and animal control for the town through the police. So we have Donna Walsh and Sophie, and your last name again is Sophie?
Schulman.
Schulman. And they are here, and they're asking for the board to consider them to be nominated by the state to be our animal inspectors. If the chair wishes, they can introduce themselves
Please.
maybe a little bit, if they so wish.
All right, well, my name is Sophie. I just started with Ashland Animal Control about 4 months ago, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I graduated from Mount Ida College, majored in veterinary technology last May, so this is kind of right up my alley. Well, what else? I have 2 dogs. I love them very much. And I'm hoping to become appointed an animal inspector, so that way I can give out quarantines and just kind of be able to do everything that an animal control officer will be able to do, especially for a time when I'll be in more than just on the weekends. So.
Great.
Good.
Any questions?
None. If things are okay, I would like to make a motion to nominate Ms. Sophie Schulman for the animal inspector's job, and subject to the condition that we have the authority to do so as before. So if somebody can second that, that will be wonderful.
I'll second that.
Second, further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Can I put your boss on the spot, though, for a minute or two? 'Cause,
Sure.
you know, I think a lot of people thoroughly enjoy, you know, your updates on Facebook and everything, but I think it would also be important, like, if the public kind of knows what you do, because
What
I
we
think
do,
you do
right.
such a vital role for the town, so.
Right, so Donna Walsh, Ashland Animal Control. What we do as animal inspectors is we work in conjunction with the town and the Department of Agriculture. We do any quarantines for dog bites, whether a dog is vaccinated or not. There is a quarantine that's involved depending on what type of injury it is. If it's a wound of unknown origin, then it's a longer quarantine. If it's just a dog bite to a human or to another domestic animal and the dog is vaccinated, then it's a 10-day quarantine. There's a lot of different variations, so we have little sheets that tell us exactly what, the amount of time is, and we have the support of the Department of Agriculture that help us to make sure that we're handing out the correct quarantine orders. Now, quarantine is what happens during a quarantine. The dogs are normally quarantined in the home, and it's like a 10-day quarantine. Say a dog bites another dog or a person, the dog is up to date on its vaccines. It would be a 10-day quarantine inside the home. The dog can be leash walked. It cannot go to a dog park. It can't go to doggy daycare. It has to remain in the premises with the family members and any household pets. It can't be introduced to anybody outside the household. So those are the quarantines that we do, and they keep us pretty busy for 2 towns. We also do barn inspections, and any type of inspection that would involve animal health. Let's say we have live animals at Ashland Day or the farmer's market. One of us usually goes down and makes sure the animals are all healthy. Petting zoos, we want to make sure the animals are healthy and that there's hand sanitizer on hand so that no one gets sick from children touching the animals and then maybe possibly going and getting food. We want to make sure that those things are provided. Barn inspections, all of our farm animals in town, we need, and chickens, which are also considered farm animals. They are all have to be checked every year to make sure that there's nothing wrong. If we ended up with any sick animals, we would have to quarantine those animals, you know, because there are diseases such as bird flu that we have to make sure that we're careful to make sure that you know, we're on top of it should anything go wrong. So that's what the animal inspectors do.
It's not just the health protection for the animals and prevention of animals, it's both for public as well as the animals together, right?
Correct.
It's
to protect the people from disease.
and the animals too.
Correct.
So that's very good.
Any other questions?
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Sure,
then and Donna represents our board when it comes to our regulations for keeping of animals, and she mentioned some of them in there. Also, I believe, Donna, you may have been involved with Dr. Schwartz back in the time when it comes to preparedness,
Yes.
animal inspectors are a very important part of it, animal control, as it relates to our shelters and where the animals go, as well as you mentioned prior, is diseased animals and the
Correct.
possibility of terrorist issues with that. And they're well trained in that. And I know Donna and Sophie have been attending other committee meetings related to hoarding with us, because some of our hoarding cases deal with animals. So they've been very benefit to what needs to be done within animal inspections.
Did you find Wilbur?
This is the 3rd year that Wilbur's been running. He's between Ashland and Hopkinton. Right now, he's in Hopkinton. The family that owns the pig isn't really big on going to get him.
Oh, really?
So right now, he's Hopkinton's issue, but if he comes to Ashland, we'll deal with it. You know, we're trying to put some pressure on her to come up with a plan to get him back under control again. But
That's
he
the
is an
name of the
escape
pig?
artist, and he does run around, and he's very famous.
Your pig was in your front yard?
I did a triple take and called at 6:20 and called I said, will you look out on the lawn, please?
Yep.
I said, there's a pig on the lawn.
Yeah.
I won't even tell you what she said.
Time for
It's,
bacon.
I didn't realize you meant fresh bacon.
Yeah, they are very
So
difficult to
Easter
catch, and unfortunately, I don't think they have the proper, you know, containment
Oh,
system.
my
is
gosh.
what the issue is, but he'll be okay. He'll get back eventually.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, keep up the good work.
It was last spring.
Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Sophie, congratulations, good luck.
Thank you very much.
We're very lucky to have you, so good, best of luck to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Very positive meeting here
No,
tonight.
we'll continue that.
And with that, we have a VIP special guest joining us tonight, taking time out of his busy schedule to join us, and it's very nice that he does that. Mr. Herbert, the town manager of Ashland. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thanks. I thought you were talking about Ed.
We'll get to him later. He's a legend, yeah.
He's a legend, yeah.
But thanks for taking a couple minutes to kind of discuss with the board, you know, the update on the fiscal 20 budget. Can't even believe that we're saying fiscal 20 budget,
Yeah.
but
It's-
Diane, you invited Mr. Herbert. Why don't you lead the discussion?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, the original discussion was to talk about communication, it wasn't necessarily the budget,
Budget.
but communication and just working, you know, through the system for the next year. So wanted to, have you come to the meeting and go over it with us, and, we did talk about budgets in the past, about, wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything along the way. So if there's anything like that you wanted to talk to us about.
Sure. So thanks for the opportunity to come visit with you. I think the last time I came and talked to the board was probably a couple of years ago. And, we talked about things like budgets and goals and objectives. And the board was in a very different place, I think, at that point in time. I was in a very different place. I think it was like my first year as town manager. So things are definitely different now. And I think we all enjoy a much more productive relationship. And I'm proud of the work that's been done by you as volunteers and the board and town officials and also the town staff. So that being said, I think we could just review really kind of some of the budgetary items, but what I would really like to do is start focusing more on goals and objectives for the coming year. I think it's really, really important that, for the most part, I have the administrative, quote-unquote, authority, but it's the Board of Health that has really the policy authority and provides the policy direction, I think, for the health activities here in town. I think to the best of our ability, when we can find ways where we can line some of those things up and some of those initiatives up, I think that's what results in the best for the community as a whole. And I think we're starting to exhibit that a little bit. I think what we might need to do a little bit better job of collectively is identifying those, commonalities and really kind of highlight those a little bit more. So, having said that, so the 2020 budget for the Board of Health this year is $171,970, so almost $172,000. So that includes an offset of the food inspection revolving account of $5,000. I want to say since 2013, so when I got here, the budget and the Board of Health so this budget has, or the Health Department, I should say, has increased almost $41,000 since that time. It's been a 30% increase over that time period. Averages a little over 4% a year. We've added, nursing services. I think there was a time when there were more nursing services that got cut. We started reintroducing that. This does not include some of the other things that we've been able to kind of do collectively, which included implementing the SHARPS program, which we did through a renegotiation of the waste management contract. And also it does not include the $20,000 that we were able to secure. John, you and I worked on this a lot with the landfill through Amoresco, getting the rest of the money needed to do the proper closure of the landfill. So I think we've made some strides there. One of the things that, is I think very important to all of us here is the rise of opiate use and substance abuse disorders. Now, we have made investments in that area, not necessarily through, the health department, but in collaboration with the health department. So we now have the benefit of a town social worker and a human services program, Jennifer Wolfing, who has been involved in this, basically leads the substance abuse task force, also has assembled and put together the hoarding task force team. Also, along with substance abuse, we've taken on the responsibility of the decisions at every turn personnel. Kristen French, she's the Director of Prevention and Outreach. So we've assumed financial responsibility for that position. There's a number of reasons for that. It can help us better align some of the services that we're offering. But at the same time, it also demonstrates to the federal government that we're willing to play an active role in that program, and thus makes us better eligible for other federal funding opportunities down the road. So that's really important. Again, I think we've really focused a lot on substance abuse recently. We've focused a lot on hoarding. I don't know what kind of updates you've been getting on the hoarding task force, but we've got, like 13 open cases now, Mark?
Yeah, we're hoping to close a couple, but we still have active 8 out of the 13. We closed a few at the last meeting.
Yeah, so it's,
Still very active, compared to one every 2 years, I told the board, and now we're up to 10 in a year.
yeah, and they take up a lot of time and a lot of resources from a lot of different departments, including animal control, as was
Is that
previously
because
mentioned.
the population is aged more here now?
It could be the dynamics of the way people are living as well. People don't live with their aunts, uncles, and
It's
their kids.
not a set age
No,
block that
there's
happens.
really no age. It's really a matter of, I think, in my view, from the changes in the years back, there was more, let's say, aggregate type of living, where now you don't see that as often. There's a lot of people out there on their own. They get forgotten, unfortunately, and then they end up with a behavioral issue such as hoarding.
Sorry.
No, and it's also one of those things, once you start devoting the resources to uncovering the depth of the problem and the scale of the problem, that's when you start seeing more cases. It's like when you see a rise in crime statistics, is it because there's actually an increase in crime, or are your police officers becoming more active, or are you implementing a new strategy? The crime was always there, you're just now able to report it.
That's what I was gonna mention, is I wonder if people are just reporting it more and know that they can reach out, whether it's the police department, fire department, animal control, or the resources as
Yeah.
well.
But, while hoarding is a mental health issue and mental illness, it also leads to actual practical, problems for the community. I mean, some of these residences, they are health hazards, they are fire hazards, they are hazards to the people living in them, they're hazards to the animals in there, they're hazards to the people around them. So it's important that we find a way to uncover it, try to treat the problem, like I said, that illness, and then also treat some of the symptoms of that problem as well. So, I mean, having said that, one of the things that I would really like to know from you as a board, and I've talked to you all, I think, in individual capacities, is, I know food inspection is a very important thing, but what are some of the things that you want to try to accomplish as a board over the next year or two? And then I think, that way we can start factoring some of that into our thought process and discussion.
I have one question. You said that the funding for the Board of Health has increased all the time, but I did see the past couple of years, it's more funds have been provided for landfill. That's where things have gone. If you remove that, how much is the increase for the Board of Health itself? That's what you need to look at it, because that's one issue that's going to stay there for a longer time until there is some kind of a solution found for it. But this is the one that we need to look at, where we make the investment in public rather than just one small area that you have of the entire town.
Okay.
So that's where the number would look. So that's where it makes it more effective for us to say we are doing a good job on funding it. And I'm sure everybody else pays a lot of money for their own health insurance, so the town has to pay for it by somehow funding it, because that's important. I'm sure you can choke down this entire Board of Health activity by reducing the funding. That's possible. But we'd like to have more funds so that we can act on other important items. Particularly, I'm interested in food inspection, that I have been telling you. For the
KG,
past
I did
3
not
years
know
I've been
that
working
about
on
you.
it. I don't want to just go to the revolving fund, but give us more from outside too.
Well, the revolving
Don't limit
funds.
it. It's not restricted. It said if you don't find the fund, take it from there. That's why the fund was created. But you can always fund it from the other sources ahead of time for something extra, and then get it out of the source when we need it.
Well, the revolving funds are key tools that you have in your toolkit. And I don't have the information in front of me right now exactly how much we've spent from that revolving fund each year, but I think I've indicated I'm more than willing, I think, to boost up our food inspection program. I think Tom does a wonderful job. I don't know if Tom's hours in his work situation prohibit him from doing more, or if we would have to look at a different inspector. But I think that's, those are, the revolving funds are tools that a lot of departments don't have, that you do. And I think it was forward thinking in 2012 that you set it
That
up.
should not be a tool to minimize our funding, but just because you already have it, you use your kitty. So we should get from outside. That's what I've been saying, that, the town gets a lot of money out of the meals tax.
Well, we had spoken.
$210,000 from the town, which is much more than the entire budget of the Board of Health, just by meals tax revenue. And
Well-
we need to have a robust food inspection program, so we need to fund it very well so that you keep getting that revenue
Well, you
from the town.
So define a robust food inspection
Well,
program.
more inspection means that more frequent inspections so that we can keep the vendors here on their toes to make sure they treat the client properly with good food and good, clean food.
So what does that mean, though? So how
Additional
many?
inspections are needed, frequent inspections are needed.
So are we talking about once a month, or, so this is the conversation that we have to have to kind of break it down into real, what does this actually
The
mean?
statistics that I collected last year with the data that's available within our department as well as over the state, it didn't come to 2 inspections per year. That's what
Okay.
they wanted, the state-wise as well as the federal department does it. We don't have that level yet.
Okay,
And that too, we have designated some of them as 1 inspection is enough, some of them 2, and we are not finishing all the 2 inspections that we need. We need that done.
But as part of this discussion, though, we as a board decided to increase this
We did,
current
we did.
to
What
17 hours,
I'm,
so we haven't reached the milestone yet that we don't know if we're gonna meet that yet, because we just increased it to 17 hours.
Correct,
Up
but-
to
so that-
17 hours a week, so we
that-
did increase, I think, from
all that I'm
from
saying
10
is
to
keep that picture in
17.
mind.
9 to 17 hours.
Because this,
I know.
this is one source of revenue, one source of action that we do reflects in the amount of meal snacks that the town gets. And if the restaurants here in the town are good, more people will visit, and then it's not only just spending in the restaurant, they'll be spending elsewhere too in the town.
But my-
If somebody walks into a place, they will go to a supermarket or another store there in the town, and then they will spend money.
Correct me, please, if I'm wrong, but when you have a revolving account, you can't take from the general fund and put it in revolving account, is that
you
correct?
can't take from the general fund and put it in the revolving
Right,
fund,
so-
no.
What he's asking for, he's mentioning meals tax and things like that in a budgetary item, we can't take it from, I mean, we can't say to you, we need $20,000.
No, I didn't say you put it in the revolving fund. I said you provide a position from the outside general fund, and then you can have one from the position from here. That doesn't violate the law. You just don't have to put the money
But
here.
we're actually in a pretty good position, because as Mr. Herbert was saying, that it was pretty good forward thinking back in 12 that we established these revolving funds. And to be honest, and if we're gonna be fair, we don't use all the money in the revolving fund.
Right,
And
that-
that's the challenge that this, and I think that this is the important conversation. What is the key core value of this board? And hey, we all know that we're blessed to have
Right.
Tom working for us. But if Tom's schedule can't get us to that 2 inspection per year thing, we might have to, you might have to, because I'm not gonna have to, but you guys might have to figure out a way to keep a valuable employee in Tom, but also still get to that 2. And that might not be as easy as you think it is, because Mr. Herbert will tell you, it's not easy to find a part-time employee to do that type of role. So it's like what comes
That's-
first, the chicken or the egg, and that's the
where-
challenge
that's where
that
we
you
have to
guys are
put
gonna
more
have to
effort.
I think, I mean, we talked about this before, and we agreed to increase it to up to 17 hours a week with
Correct.
the current inspector to see if we can tighten that gap, and I think we have to wait to see, because we don't, we only have, I mean, it's only been, what, a couple months maybe?
Not even 2 months, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I don't want so bringing it back, so you would like to do at a minimum 2 inspections per year per an establishment.
Right.
So how many are we doing now? How many,
We're averaging, we're prioritizing as we always have. The board voted, I'd say 10 years ago, to prioritize. So places that sell just packaged perishables now, they get inspected once a year, such as your CVS, Rite Aid, places that sell dairy products but packaged. Then you get into your next risk, which are more your larger convenience stores, your sandwich shops. Then after that, you get into large facilities such as restaurants, grocery stores. That's tiered differently. So we tiered it based on based on a couple things. The state allowed it, and obviously we wanted to get to the high tier at least twice a year. But now we're tiering it to 3 times a year, starting now with these additional hours. So we're working for the high tier. And with that said, we're also, and Mike, you saw my objectives for the goals and objectives, which the board's major goal that I've been informed to do is be proactive, not reactive. And so I put in there, for that full-time assistant health agent, most of it was food. To get someone that can do the education as well as go after the critical violations that might be found in our facilities, food facilities. So, and look at, the user fee to help supplement the funding of this position. So when I talked with the finance committee about that too, I know you were in and out of the room when I was talking, but, I'm looking at, how can this be a viable position that can be funded partially through the revolving fund? I wasn't really getting in, I know where KG's coming from with the 0.75 cents for the meals tax, but that's another day, another
Can I
issue.
just ask a question, Mark, just because you lost me and it's probably me. So the sandwich shops are getting done probably twice a year, and then the restaurants are probably 3. So the,
Yeah,
I mean, the only
restaurants
one
are
we're
done.
not, so
High
the only
volume
ones we're not
restaurants.
hitting 2 a year is, I'll call it incidental, the packaged foods.
Correct, and
Okay.
actually, the state just changed the law. If you have a package, we only have a few of them, but if you sell packaged goods that are not perishable, that don't require temperature controls, you don't need a permit anymore. So that will take a small portion of the
It-
revolving fund away. So if I own a liquor store and I sell just potato chips and snacks, I will not need a
So
permit
is this with
anymore.
this is with the additional hours? This is the forecast with the additional hours, so,
Yes, that
Okay,
was
so-
with, I looked at about 60% of that full-time assistant coming from being part of the food program,
But the seven-
including educational
Tom can
programs.
meet these,
Tom can just barely make 17. He can just
but
barely make it.
he can do these for 17 hours a week? Like,
Uh,
he can
he's-
meet these
He's
guidelines?
he's barely making 17. That's
Okay.
the
But
problem. He's
just-
part-time,
Us, I mean,
you know.
that's what we said, I think we said
With
up to.
Mark filling in.
But if,
But we're meeting these guidelines with the increase.
The
we
best he
already have.
can, and I'll be
Right.
honest, the best he
He-
can. It's hard, he's full-time
He-
somewhere
he-
else, so it's the
he
best
is
he
a
can.
very good qualified person, but
Yeah.
what I see the problem is that he has to fit hours with his
Yes.
regular work, what he has. So the remaining time is the one that he has to use it or adjust it. So he may not be available at the time when you need it on call for
And then-
something.
then
That's what
I'm
we
So
there.
said.
that,
discussing it.
that
I
does
think we
happen quite often, so we need
Yeah.
to, then Mark
But I
has
think
to
what we
rush
should,
through,
I
or
think
John runs
I mean, I
through
think
that
what we
one.
would say then is that we're not meeting where we wanna be. Now,
We-
that's kind of what
Well,
I'm,
there's some other additional opportunities we
Well-
all discuss, and that's having food education. A major part of your regulatory program is educating as well. So, when you do the data tabulation and you find that hand washing seems to be what we're observing the most in our restaurants, you do a session on hand washing. Closing a facility during power outages, we found that out just recently. You do a session on emergency preparedness, that you would have either a generator or you close your facility down, lock up your refrigeration. Things like that come to light when it happens and when the inspections happen. So that would be another part of that position that I had put together. The board was looking at a full-time public health nurse, but in respects to the request for food, I always felt that we could fit 60% of the food program into a full-time assistant health agent. Some days, some way.
he's losing me.
Yeah,
Sitting here.
No, I'm just bringing up what was sent
No.
for goals and objectives.
Not only the issue of physical inspection outside, you need to look at the paperwork too,
Oh,
because
sure.
I looked at the paperwork and I found there are some
Yeah.
deficiencies that we need to correct it, so,
Yeah.
which can happen only if you can spend the time on the paper to look
Correct.
at it, otherwise
That's a
you
good
wouldn't
point.
know.
Thank
For
you.
example, an institution may be open for, or a vendor may be open for 80 hours a week. They only have 40 hours of an anti-choke person or 30 hours of certified food manager, then you need to look at the risk factor there. And
Okay.
maybe you put more inspection there to keep that ready, or tell the vendor, say, look, you're short of the anti-choke person staff, you train them more. So these things can only be done by looking at the paper, which you need to do office work too. So
Okay.
it's not just physical inspection at the vendor's place.
I agree. Can I just, I can only give you my history, some good, a lot bad. And one of the reasons why I've been kind of promoting a more proactive Board of Health is because, I'll protect the guilty here and not name names, but every time in the last, I would say, half a dozen years, that this board has reacted to a grocery store, a rest home, a restaurant situation, the thing that has always come back to us, and I want to compliment Tom. You and I were together in the last couple of weeks at an event, and I got called away. And Tom went back then and spent some time with that restaurant, which we won't name, and really worked with the management and the staff. And then we got a glowing email from the staff general manager, hey, this is great, you know, you guys should do this more often. And when we've been to other places, like work with management of large retail establishments, this is great, you guys should do this more. And I know, and it's pie in the sky, but it is the proactive public health that is so important nowadays. Because when you walk into a gas station nowadays, you're not just walking into a gas station. You got a Dunkin' Donuts, you got fresh food, you got fresh fruit on the shelf, you got the milk, you've got everything. And I've walked into places here as a member of the Board of Health going, whoa, what the heck is going on here? Or well-known restaurants in this town that were documented in the newspaper. And it really is just more about re-educating and not being, we're not here to find fault with you. We're here to be proactive with you and, hey, work on that, work on this, work on that a little bit. I think builds back to what KG has been saying for the last 3 or 4 years is, if we do more inspections, it's not about catching people doing something wrong. It's about promoting good public health.
So, I have a few other points, but I
Sure.
want to go stick on food inspections for a second since we're on there. And to Michael's point that he made earlier about the idea of goals. And if I'm crazy, I'm kind of thinking out loud here for a second as I'm listening to this conversation. We have a pretty good handle on how many food establishments we have in town, right? So we can factor that in, plus how many might more come in. We know, we have a pretty good idea as to how many times we'd like to get into each of those establishments each year to achieve what we want to achieve. And we probably can make a pretty good estimate as to how much time each of those inspections would make. So it seems to me that applying a simple math formula to those 3 numbers would get us our ideal number. That's where we want to be at. Now we have a goal. Now we have a goal, an idealistic goal. That's what we want to strive for. Now we have to look at where our budget is and what it might take to get to that goal. It might take 3 years to get to that goal or 5 years to get to that goal achievably. But if we can make it a step closer each year, working together, and then, you know, at the end of each year, we can report back to the administration, this is how many more inspections we were able to do with that additional funding. It's working. That might be promotion for administration to say, hey,
Absolutely.
that makes sense. Let's kick it up a little bit and get to the next level.
And
That's
I think-
exactly how it
Well, I was
works.
gonna say, and I think that's where we were at when we
Yeah.
said that we all collectively agree that Tom does a wonderful job. And we wanted to maximize what his capabilities were, and that's why we went the maximum to 17. So that's what I was saying, is we can't really measure that yet because we're not there. So at least if we had a few months under our belt with the food, we would know
Right.
where we're at, and as well as we'll know where we are with the budget.
And there's you know, the goal that you're trying to reach, and then you've got the strategies of how you're going to achieve it. So let's just say with your restaurants, your tier 3 restaurants, you have a goal now of inspecting each one proactively 3 times a year. And let's just say there's 10 of those establishments. I'm sure there's a lot more. So now you have 30 inspections that you have to do for that year. And maybe with the resources you have right now, you can only get to 60% of those, right? So you're only able to do 18 of those proactive inspections. So then we look, okay, how do you close that gap? How do you know, it might be an assistant health director whose role includes health inspections. It might be finding another part-time employee. It might be, you know, Tom or your current inspector might be able to do more. I don't think that's the situation right now. But then I guess what I'm trying to say is when you separate the goal and the outcome, and then you can start look at different strategies that you can use to try to achieve that outcome. Some that might be more, you know, more, I guess you could say efficient or effective than others. So that's really the type of, you know, mindset I'm in, kind of thought process. I'm expecting really more, and Mark will tell you this, more out of like the staff and everything, and to help, you know, help you as a board kind of help establish some of those goals and say, well, this is, you know, where you want to go, the direction you want to go in, what you want to focus on, et cetera.
Makes sense.
That
Yeah, it does.
Makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I think a good example is the fire department. They're a pretty easy example. You know, they keep great records of how many calls they have. You know, medical calls, false alarms, you know, structure fires, you know. So, you know, they can present that to me, you know, at the drop of a hat. They have to keep it for, you know, state reasons as well. But, you know, they can easily demonstrate, you know, a need you know, and sometimes, you know, it might not necessarily be you put 4 firefighters on and 1 per shift. Maybe you look at just doing 2 and have them concentrated during the days. You know, that might be where more of your call volume is. There's all these different strategies, but, you know, you do have standards and goals that you're trying to meet.
In the same vein of food inspections, another topic I wanted to talk about is tobacco. We recently passed a new tobacco rep policy, which is gonna take effect in January of 2020. And once that kicks into gear, and I'm gonna just stay positive that it's going to, we're probably gonna have to change the inspection process. There's probably gonna be some education involved in that. What I'd really love to see is maybe the legislature get involved and bring in a program similar to the TIPS program for alcohol and have something similar for tobacco. But I think that there's gonna be some funding needed to make that new tobacco regulation a reality. Once it goes into effect, it's useless unless we enforce it.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to enforce it, there has to be inspections. Later on tonight, Ed's gonna talk about pesticides, and I think that everyone's gonna agree that that is a serious and important issue. And I think that some money's gonna have to get spent in terms of education on that. And again, if that becomes a policy and a regulation, it's gonna need enforcement, and enforcement costs money. We've talked about vaccination clinics. I don't really have a full handle on where we stand with that yet, because I think that there's some mixed emotions about that. But I do think vaccinations are clearly an important thing, and I think that there are people in our community that need to be vaccinated that can't afford to. And at the very least, if we're not giving them a vaccination, we have to provide a method for them to get one. That takes money and effort, and that, you know, there's been a lot of talk about additional hours for the public health nurse. And the last thing, only for clarification, you had mentioned them earlier, the two employees that you brought on. Kristen French was one, and the other was?
Jennifer Wolfing.
Jennifer. And the only question I had, just for clarification, now that we're all sitting together and talking about it in public, is I kind of have an idea, because you kind of alluded to what they do and what role they play. But I also think that part of what they do is relevant to what we do here. And so I was just curious as to why they're currently in the departments that they're in, as opposed to under the Board of Health.
Well, I think I'll start kind of the opposite way. So health is very unique in the sense that you have a regulatory function, and then you also have like a social services type of function. So you could so we have now this Human Services and Community Programs Department. You could very easily put the health department under that umbrella, but at the same time, you've got a very important regulatory role that, you know, follows into permitting and all that stuff. So you can make a very, very good case where it could be kind of under the planning and development side, if you will. So it's really hard to kind of pigeonhole each of those. So I can just tell you from my perspective, when I started as town manager, I wanted to provide, I felt like there was a very, very strong need in the community to make sure that people didn't fall through the cracks. And that, you know, if there was a person who was coming in and seeking services on one hand, that we had the ability to recognize if they needed other services and had the ability to provide some of those wraparound services and handoffs to the appropriate departments. And so that's really how this Human Services and Community Programs model emerged. And so that is really Jennifer's role, is not necessarily just health, but she is a liaison with the school department. She's a liaison with things like veteran services. She's a liaison with elder affairs, you know, youth and family services, and the food pantry. So when you have somebody who comes in, and the health, you know, health as well. So when somebody comes in, or let's just say a kid is having some issues at school, you know, and obviously there's some concerns that are identified, and it might be a symptom of a larger whole. The principal has the ability to bring in Jennifer, who can then tie in all these other different services, both located within the town and outside the town, like external agencies, to help that family and help that person. And I'm not necessarily sure we'd be able to do that if it was under the, you know, the umbrella of the Board of Health. I don't mean to diminish any of what you're doing. I'm just trying to think of things in terms of trying to break down silos. I do think what we could do a better job of is providing communication to the board of what activities are happening. Mark's been very active with, the hoarding task force and some of those things as well. And, making sure that you're apprised of some of those situations and maybe even bringing in Kristen and Jennifer to, talk to the Board of Health. I know that they would be willing and excited to talk to you about some of the work they're doing.
Okay, so, yeah, I mean, one of the things that came to my mind as you were talking, because earlier you were talking about hoarding, and I know we've talked at our meetings about some of the cases that Mark has worked with in hoarding. So would it be fair to say that they would be a resource of the Board of Health? So if Mark was working on a hoarding case and, he got called into a place and said, hey, wait a minute, this might be better served for Jennifer, or I could use Jennifer to tag in on this, and he would call.
They're already
Yeah,
connected, the
that
resources are already
happens,
connected.
that happens, maybe not necessarily a lot with Mark and Jennifer, but like with the police department and Jennifer kind of serves as the node, the central node for everything to kind of, she connects the dots. I think she's the chief Connect 4 officer or something like that.
That makes sense to me. Thanks.
Well, we're talking about it, but I know something was on Facebook, but next Wednesday, the food pantry's gonna start being open on Wednesday
Yeah.
nights, and I know I talked to Mark that if we get to the point of doing vaccinations, it might be handy to have it on Wednesday nights when everybody's open, as well as now the community center.
Yeah, so that type of coordination and communication is, I think, critical to making sure that we're maximizing all the resources that we have, right? And, I think that's critical from a taxpayer standpoint. You want to make sure that the money that you're spending is being used effectively and efficiently. And I have found, especially in Ashland, when people have faith that that is happening, they're willing to put in more resources if you're saying, I want to try to accomplish this goal. If they know that the money that you currently have is being spent efficiently and effectively, they're willing to make that investment, an additional investment, I should say.
If I may, as it relates to public health nursing, we've had discussion with the school nurses as well, and they're the ones indicating to us there's a demand out there for vaccination clinics. They're also willing to work with us. Might it be on a Wednesday night where they would be after school, obviously funding, they're expected to be funded for that. We would have to, I don't know if the funding for those additional 5 hours was put into the budget, but Nancy only has so much time to do communicable disease work and other work she does. She is working right now to seek information on the refrigeration and freezer that we might need if we decide on this. And also, the good part is when it comes to cost, there's no charge for the vaccines that are utilized for school vaccinations. That comes to us from the state for free. It's just the cost to do the service of inoculating the students. So, I don't know, Mike, are we expecting to just go on the 5 hours a week next year, or are we going more than that?
So we've budgeted, I think, this year 10,000.
Correct. Yeah.
So does that equate to
The
5 hours?
a week. Yep.
Okay.
It was discussed in finance, and I don't think you were in the room when we were discussing it, so I didn't know where it stood.
Does that include supplies as well, Mark?
That was more for the hours.
Okay, so
It
will we,
was for the hours, not more, it was for
so
the hours.
would we need more money for supplies, like
Well,
syringes and alcohols and Band-Aids and all that,
we
gloves?
probably won't see a large percentage of that money utilized for that, but you will need money for syringes, and unless you're getting it for free from the state, which at times you do,
Do
but
we-
I don't think we will, but the
Do we have a
freezer.
means to estimate what would that cost be to run?
That's what
the thing
Nancy's
through?
working on right now, and
So
the
if we can just
freezer,
give up and say this is the amount, and then we can say, look, increase it so that we can divert this money
Is-
and subdivide it and keep that as a separate item in the budget so that it's spent only for that rather than something else.
and we do have syringes right now. We're overstocked in some of those supplies, but we need a freezer, and I've been looking online, a small freezer.
Well, I think,
and
I actually think,
189.
believe it or not, Beth Reynolds was able to procure.
Yeah.
She was
secure
trying,
one.
Mike, and unfortunately, someone grabbed it before
Yeah,
she could get
Oh,
it.
really?
We tried that.
But we thanked her
did.
for
Okay.
her efforts, and,
Okay.
but I was looking online, you can get a freezer for $189, so it's not a tremendous cost. And that's how we try to buy supplies when we see if there's additional funds that we might have.
Would that
so-
come, that would come out of our operating budget?
Well, it would have to come out of a line item under, we have a line item for basically miscellaneous supplies at $100. So it would take away from the line item, and that's when I go see Brittany, our finance
Well, that's
director.
what I was
and
gonna
Mark,
say,
say,
if
did
it's
you a-
150, I
Yeah, I
think
was
we'll
gonna say,
be
did
able
you
to
ask,
cover it.
did you ask for an increase in that line item for
What
supplies,
if
Mark?
somebody writes it
Well,
off?
Probably get a free one on
We're waiting to
Would
see
you
if we're
take
gonna
it?
have this program.
Would the
So-
town take it if somebody
Michael,
writes
is-
off the money?
But if we're not gonna have the funding for the for the
Would-
nurses,
would-
oh, I'm sorry.
would-
No, what- go ahead.
Would
Would
You
the
have
town,
floor.
would town take it if somebody writes off that money? For the freezer, $180?
The board, the selectmen could
Good.
accept a donation of a freezer if you're,
I got-
Granted, I'm here.
Okay, I got the information on it if you need it, so I'd be glad to give it to you.
is, I
Very
ju-
nice of you, Kate.
Thank you, KG.
KG.
So, I don't know, Mike, do you know offhand if we're gonna increase the hours at all? Because,
It's, right now, it's budgeted at 10,000.
Okay, well,
Now,
we'll
I
do the
don't know
best
if we
we
would be
can.
looking at increasing the hours of our nurse. You know, one thing we haven't talked about is here tonight is regionalization.
Exactly.
The possibility of,
and that, you and I
Yeah.
talked about that, that would be
Yeah.
a great idea if we could look at regionalization.
and with the, I have had conversations with the new administration in Framingham, and there's an openness to having that conversation, and,
Good.
you know, I think both boards of health, the boards of health of each community needs to feel comfortable with that, not just, you know, the administrative ends, but.
Yeah, we shouldn't fight over or talk about $180. We need to talk about more money for the Board of Health, that's important.
Well, I
Bigger
understand.
well,
numbers.
and that's what I was gonna say, is
You know,
we're,
often the town meeting in 10 minutes, you pass 63 million when we debate.
I
rest
can
of
tell
the
you, it ain't
numbers
10
together.
minutes, KG, sitting up, sitting up in front.
but
So,
did, are we, I think I know the answer, but we are beyond the time to ask you for more money.
Yeah, I mean, the budget, you know, the budget's
Well,
been
just we're
set.
talking about supplies and we're talking about all these things, and it's not for next year, so this would be, again, a goal for the following year, correct?
Just, so I get, you know, Chris, you know, basically spoke about the process. While I understand, you know, at least from the financial committee from the year before, that I don't know that every single thing Mark does can be put down in a tangible hour.
Yeah.
That you can account for compartmentalize every task he does and say, well, this food inspection that he does takes an hour, this one takes 3 hours. This is a problem, this is gonna be 2 hours here, it's gonna be 3 hours here, it's gonna be another 4 hours, or whatever it is. But I get the process. You want us to try to come up with as close of an estimate as the manpower hours that we need to accomplish what we need to accomplish, or that we would like to accomplish. So if Mark, you know, and I don't know how many million things he does, let's say there's 20 things
A lot.
that Mark's responsible for, you know, that right now, you know, at least a big portion of that is food inspections. Some of that he can let go to our part-time, you know, food inspector, Tom, who by everybody's accounts, you know, does a great job, and we're lucky to have him. So I think what I really wanna know, and I just don't know how the process works. I'm sure John's more familiar, I'm sure, you know, Diane is as well. So if we get this information, we say, all right, here's Mark Orum's full-time job. He's got 37 and a half hours a week, however many hours a week he works, minus vacation time, and he does hoarding. He's doing, you know, vaccinations. He's doing, you know, every single event that comes into town. He's worrying about smoking. He's worrying about opioid things. He's worrying about, you know, the rest home, you know, whatever other public health things he does. And we say, all right, well, you know, it looks like there's, you know, 75 hours a week. How do we end up justifying that to you? And then where does that money come from if we say, or if we really feel we need another employee that's gonna cost the town 75 grand a year? I don't know how that process works. So even if we can justify it, where does that money come from? And you know, cause you got other people asking you for money too. I know it's not just us, so I don't really know that process.
So in terms of just the general budget process, so in October, in November, the Finance Committee issues kind of like budget instructions, which, you know, talks about goals-based budget usually, you know, talks about, you know, very generalities. Then we send out budget instructions to each of the department heads, right? School department kind of has their own process, but it runs very similar, you know, concurrently. I think this year the, you know, department heads' budgets, which include the goals that they want to accomplish and the funding they need to support those goals, is supposed to be in at the end of November, right? And then from that standpoint, you know, you start putting together all the requests and you start looking at that. And then in January, you start getting a much better sense of what the revenue picture is going to look like. You start, at that point, you get the governor's budget numbers at the end of January, so you start to see a little bit more of how much more money that you have. And then you start getting a little bit more fidelity of the picture of how much in wants are being asked for, and then how much money is going to be available. And then you have a discussion of, you know, so what are we gonna do here? Is there a way we can accomplish this task using maybe, you know, doing this? Is there a way that we can, you know, maybe only put a little bit towards this, you know, maybe we wouldn't accomplish the whole goal, but maybe it can get us halfway there. But the key point, I think, for the boards and committees is before that budget submission comes to me and Brittany in November, the board, like the Board of Health, needs to have a discussion, really, I think in September, you know, probably even August, about what it is you want to try to accomplish for the coming year, and how you're going to know that you've accomplished it and making progress towards that. And then you can start putting together a budget submission based on those goals and objectives. And I wouldn't necessarily think about it in terms of manpower, I'd think of it in terms of outputs and outcomes, right? So
that's what, so when you say you have the department heads come up with goals and objectives, so, but everything that we've heard says you need to justify the position by the amount of time it takes to complete those tasks to, you know, what we have. Because if you go by, let's say, statistics that Mark will give us, he'll say, is it recommended, you know, that that you have one health agent for every 10,000, or is that that's just a recommendation, that's not a hard and fast. But we're 3/4 over that already, and we still have, you know, one guy, so it would seem to me there's a need. Now, I don't know exactly how to justify that. I just know that it seems like we have more things that we want to do that we don't have the manpower for it, and I want to know, just for me, you know, the best way to approach you. I'm not saying we're going to get it all. I don't expect that, but it would be nice if we could, you know, make some inroads, because the town's growing, you know, and I don't think he can do it all.
Right.
Well,
The statistics here, or the numbers that's given in this one, about 1.7, has a certain set of defined tasks for it. And they assume that all the Board of Health may do all of those tasks. That's how they came up with 1.7 or 1.8 or whatever that number specified here.
Yeah.
But what we do, or what we intend to do, is what we have to look at it and see whether it matches with exactly that one or exceeds that one. Then when we can increase the number. Otherwise, we had to scale it down to whatever that number is going to be based on what we are doing today and what we intend to do later on. That's what the goals are and how we're going to accomplish it. That's what makes a measurement for Michael Herbert to come up with a number.
But you need that data. You need that data. And I will say, like, there are national standards for basically every single public sector area there is out there. Fire department, you know, the National Fire Protection Standards are 8 firefighters per shift. We are incredibly grateful that we're now at 5. And, you know, if we get to 6, it's going to be a miracle compared to where we were like 4 years ago. Public facilities, you should have X amount of maintenance for X amount or Y amount of square footage of buildings that you have. We're way below that. Ashland is typically a community that looks more on the value side than I think the performance side. I think that's a fair, you know, tries to find value instead of, you know, just kind of.
Yeah, which is
spending
in
a lot
order
of money.
to get some of those things, if you recall the discussion that I had with you in your office about getting an accreditation done for this department, which is a must. If you do that, then we know how we are performing it from a third party outside, and what we are supposed to do. They will probably give you a chart out and say, then we can.
But
work on, and then that's a one-time investment that you may have to do to get that done. So you have a seal of approval from them saying that, yes, this is doing good, no, this is not doing good, then we need to go and improve on it. So that may be a better way to.
But sometimes accreditation requires things that we know that we're not gonna be able to do. So I'll give you a good example. I wanna have the police department accredited, okay? It cannot be accredited until it has a new building or a facility that is much more modernized. Just can't do it. There's a first step, which is called credentialing, which we can achieve, and we're working towards that. But spending the money towards doing accreditation, when you know at the end, you don't have the infrastructure
What's the current
necessary.
deficiency in this one to get to that level, to get from our Board of Health standards? Where are we standing in that, reaching out to getting accreditation done? Where are we standing?
I don't know if I understand the question.
How do
You
we
said
get
that
accredited?
you need the police department needs a building, that's what you said. We don't have it, so we cannot go there to get accreditation. What are we lacking to get the accreditation done from ours? for
I don't
us?
know. I don't know that right now.
So if that can be
Make this
evaluated
in
from your
record.
side, then we can fill in that and then get the accreditation, then that may be a better.
Yeah, accreditation is a very important factor in public health, and it's been stressed over the past 5 years from the national level down, and it's happening, as Mike said, in other departments. And they would look fully at what you're doing, and right now, unfortunately, there's not many cities and towns doing it. I looked into this 3 years ago because it's the cost of getting involved with it. It's immediately $5,000 for a small town. I did ask, back when this was all starting, to our DPH commissioner at the time, if they could consider regionalizing that concept, get maybe 15 small towns to pay $5,000, but the problem is the group that does this, they're a national group, will not allow that. So that's what I had for the response. But we still can start looking at some of those models to see where we stand. I think you're correct, KJ. It's a great way to compare where we are and where we need to go. And to get accredited would be ultimately my goal too, for this,
What
for
would
the
we need
board.
to
I mean,
do to
if
get-
it's $5,000, it's a pittance compared to $63 million, and as well as the free cash that's coming up
What-
here, we should
what do
be
we-
able to spend it.
What do
Come
we
on,
do to
Mike.
get credited though, Mark? What-
You have to join this national group, and they will come in and they will oversee the overview the department to see what is needed, and they'll come out, almost like what we're doing right now.
It's
and
a
they'll come
third
out with a-
independent party, rather than
Yeah.
I'm saying that I'm
Yeah.
doing good, they will tell you whether doing good or bad. It's
Exactly.
an evaluation, that's an exam that's being done for you, that's all.
And
It's
I-
better for you to have that done, that way, you know where you stand, you're not doing good, then you need to get better yourself.
But can I add a little something to this? And
Sure.
Chris is gonna give me a dig, because it's gonna be another shameless plug, but all politics is local, okay? And for more than a decade, this board has done some wonderful things that unfortunately have been whitewashed by some not so important things. And I'm not even talking in the past 3 or 4 years. There was a time before Mr. Hart even joined the Board of Health, and Diane will talk, is that, it was, the Board of Health was filing open meeting complaints against the selectmen were filing open meeting. Sometimes this board, I think it's fair to say, has been its own worst enemy. Because I think the public supports events like we did tonight. Even if they don't agree with the tobacco regulations that became, we can make a very good case to the public that was public health. The Sharps program was great public health. We've done a lot of great things in the community, but at the same time, what I think we lost our way, even Ed, I think, Ed stepped away, is we lost our ability to communicate with a town manager that's gonna listen to us. He's not gonna agree with everything that we say, and we're not gonna agree with everything that he says. But what we're doing here tonight, I think it's not gonna, it probably not even gonna pay off for another year, but I think if you look 2 or 3 years down the way, he understands what we're looking for, what you guys are looking for. You understand that you can't have it for this reason. I think tonight is that first step to, no pressure, Mr. Herbert, to eventually getting to where we do, because then you can communicate it with your finance committee, with the board of selectmen. Because the whole key to this is communication. And the one thing that I regret 3 or 4 years ago is we lost our ability to communicate with each other. It was, can you believe this is happening? Can you believe that has happened? Can you believe another open meeting law complaint was filed? And we all lost our way. We didn't lose what we wanted to do, but we lost our ability. It was too much chatter, too much clutter. And I think it's imperative for the new board as you go forward is that if you're not talking, and we said it, Ron, you and I were saying it a couple years ago, if we're not talking public health, we're not gonna talk about anything. And I think that has gotta be the key. It has to be always public health.
I'm sure
And I
someday
think
it'll
even
happen.
Ed would agree with you.
Have patience, perseverance, and do that.
So,
You will
so,
have it.
like, I mean, my one piece I think of like parting advice would be have the discussions about what you want to accomplish, you know, in the following year, in August, in September, and start identifying, okay, well, these are the gaps in service, and this is what we want to try to rectify. And then put that, you know, in your budget request and budget submission, and then we can start talking about it and saying, okay, well, you know, okay, this is what you need. I'd probably push back and say, well, could you think, you know, can you maybe do it this way? Or can you, I don't know if I'd necessarily push back with you, but I'd probably push back on Mark, who would then come back to you. But I think having clear, first of all, a clear message is really important. So it can't be like 5 individual priorities that kind of, you know, from 5 individual members that just kind of get thrown out like a shotgun approach. You know, you need to have discussions. You need to come to consensus on, you know, 2 or 3 things that are really important that you want to accomplish on a proactive standpoint. It's the advice I give to the Board of Selectmen and, you know, any board like that.
And then if regionalization comes to the table with you, you will have a discussion, is that how you would have a discussion with Mark about it, or would we, like, is it something that we should pursue or look into, or is it something you will do?
So I think the process would be, you know, Mark and I have talked about it. I think Mark is open to the concept. I would probably have a conversation with the mayor, or the mayor's COO, and talk about the feasibility of it from an administrative standpoint, and then look at, you know, what that might look like, what a regionalized vision might look like. And then we would need to take it to our respective boards of health and say, you know, this is what we're thinking. Are you going to feel okay with this? And then at that point, you sign what's known as an intermunicipal agreement. In this case, the Board of Selectmen would be signing it on behalf of the town of Ashland, and probably you would have to have the Board of Health sign it, and then also, like, the mayor would be signing it and framing
But
it.
that would be something that comes from you and the mayor versus, okay.
And it can be a tenuous process.
Yeah.
I mean, I championed when I was selectman that we should regionalize with Hopkinton, thinking it was a great idea. And 2 years into it, we realized, wait a minute, this is even gonna cost us more. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that would
Right.
happen here, but there's a lot of, you know, it's a lot of things, but I think you guys should look into it, yeah, definitely look into it.
I think, John, if I may, one of the things that has become very evident to me, and it's more and more as we have this discussion, I think, Ron, you as a practicing doctor will appreciate this. Perception of public health, and I think part of what we do as volunteers here is really a qualitative thing. But when we have to get down into the practice and the business of it, it's quantitative. And bringing the qualitative and quantitative together is very difficult. It's complex because they're from 2 different worlds.
It is.
So,
And my background is I started in municipal government and performance management. That was my thing. And the one thing I learned was that performance metrics don't necessarily give you the right answers, but they help you at least ask the right questions. And you know, I'm not looking for, like, you know, a fact, you know, some super specific, you know, quantitative analysis done on things, but, you know, it's at least show me that, you know the direction that you want to go in and what that gap is, and then we can start thinking of brainstorming of ways of how to get there, how to close that gap. Which
So
will
Diane
probably
wrote it
require
down,
money.
August.
Okay.
August.
Thank you. I think
Thank
it's
you, thank you for
beneficial
taking
coming.
time out of your
Thank
busy
you.
schedule.
Yeah, you know, I think when I first started, I said I would do this each year. I did it the first year, did not do it the second year. So
Should we
I
book
Don't
think
worry,
this
we'll
is
see
good.
you in August.
Yeah, we should go ahead and book it, yeah.
Now, is it true that this is the longest tenured employee in Ashland right now? I think it is.
June,
Oh, June
yeah,
is?
June's,
But you're
I've
second.
been here
June.
40
I'm sorry,
years.
June.
But Mark, you're close, man. You're
June
close.
is
You
our
in
40
June,
years.
right?
June,
age better, Mark, no.
June celebrated 40 years.
On the hot seat right now. If something happens to June, he's gonna be the first one.
Yeah, and I get to.
That's true. Everybody's gonna be looking right to him.
Where's the new
privileged seat.
chief?
Yeah, yeah. June celebrated 40 years.
Wow.
this
A long
year.
time.
Wow. Good, congratulations to June.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about our staff, and I congratulate our staff, and sing their praises a lot, and that includes, the people we've hired recently, but it also includes the people who've been here for a while. They keep things, going and keep things moving forward.
Well, and if I may, the dialogue tonight was excellent, and Mike and I had dialogue even on the stairs, I remember.
Yeah.
And I was happy. If there's anything I would ask is dialogue, and indeed I'm already working on next year, FY '21, so, and we'll start earlier too, but it's, we gotta get that collective decision from the board, which indeed took a little longer than I expected. But again, it's because we all have different views of where we should go, and I know I presented to you, Mike, 2 big positions, 2 new full-time positions. And I know it's a lot, but it's seeds again, as I've always said, and even at finance, Ed, you were there. I'm planting seeds, I'm Johnny Appleseed, I guess. I just hope it rains someday, as they say in Cass County, we're praying for rain. But it takes time, and I respect that. I work in government, I'm a city councilor. I respect what you're doing, but the dialogue is truly what is so important, and I thank you for being here tonight.
I know you want to leave, but I do have another question with what Mark said, is because, I'm new to sitting on an elected board, but the budget is actually the department head's budget, not the board's, correct? I know there's,
I mean,
in the past
technically,
board, there was confusion about that.
the submission is,
Changed.
but it really needs to be an example of the board's priorities and goals from a policy standpoint. I mean, money is money, so everything we do with involving finance is to fund activities. It's to do capital projects. It's to fund acquisitions, and it's to fund policies and procedures and services. So, there needs to be, I think, a policy direction behind the budget submission. Yes.
And I did have this discussion with Jen. It's been the way here since I've been here. You talk about my longevity. It's always been the prerogative of the board to give me direction to send to you as the department head to you. So, it's the way it's worked, but
I just
just
remember being
obviously
a
need to
discussion
speed it up.
with Judy here, and that's why I mentioned it.
But Judy had her own ways of thinking as well, but this
I just
board has
wanted
always,
clarification on it.
this board has always done it this way, but obviously we'll speed it up to meet the deadlines.
Things change.
I mean,
Absolutely.
board
Its
does
own
have a
people.
say. Board does have a say in the budget.
Oh,
because-
absolutely, oh, I know, I
Yeah,
just wanted clarification on it.
And so what happens, I think, just to kind of finish off the thing that Ron started here is, so, I put it together, I put a budget, I present it to the FinCom, we usually go through budget hearings, they push back on my, recommended budget, Board of Selectmen eventually endorses it. The budget that goes to town meeting is the town manager's recommended budget. And, so that's how the process plays out in town meeting, hopefully it passes at town meeting, and then you go to implement, and usually in November, we're making adjustments because the state numbers have changed.
It's a lot of moving parts, a lot more than I would think.
Yeah, it's unfortunately not logical or efficient sometimes.
That's why they have
It's big
managers.
Yeah.
Manage it.
Yeah, gotta divvy up a lot, there's a lot of things to feed, and,
But I want you to know as the town manager, it's probably the last time you and I will discuss in a public forum like this, that how lucky you are to have both Laura and Mark working for you.
I agree.
They're a pleasure to work for, and every conversation I have with them is what is in the best interest for the town of Ashland and the residents and public also. You should probably give Laura a raise, but
I'll second that.
but she makes us all look good.
Yes, she
And,
does.
Mark has been an asset to the community for many, many years, so I just think it's
Absolutely.
important that you know that, they
Well, I
do a great
appreciate
job
that, and
for
I
the-
take pride in you saying that.
All right, should we let him go home? He's
All
out.
Thank you,
right.
Michael.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
All right,
thank
it's
you.
my pleasure.
Thank you very
My
much.
pleasure.
Thank you.
So take it easy.
Yeah.
Food, food, food.
See you tomorrow.
Kinda hit on
See you tomorrow.
my yellow sheet.
Thank you again. It's
I don't
means a
give
lot
up
to
that
me.
easily, the other food.
It's inspected.
Yeah.
All right, item 6 on our agenda, which means we're halfway. Status and update on Mill Pond Rest Home. You wanna do it
Oh.
first?
Well, it's gonna be a 2 seconds update, right?
Yeah, okay, well,
Yeah.
I can do this first.
Yeah. wanna
Whatever
just
you
do
want
that
me to
real
do.
quick?
Sure. So, just so the board knows, Mill Pond has had a change in management. They have a new person that's running the actual facility, and Rita Hyde, and she's going to be meeting with us being the plumbing inspector, because there's some pending items, and the building commissioner this week, and myself. So, and I can go over the food information with her as well. But we just had an issue just recently that the board probably saw, and they took immediate action, and in fact changed the pesticide operator they utilize to go to a more specialized, and that'll be part of the discussion too. But we're looking for, talking about proactive, we're looking now to see a very proactive approach, and that's my best hope. And including with the food facility that we're responsible for, they've come through now with what they needed to do, but they, like I said, they still got some building and plumbing issues that have to be resolved. And they being Matt, I forget Matt's last name.
Sweeney.
Sweeney, thank you, Diane, and Rita will be meeting with us, so it's moving, which is good.
Was there any resolution on somebody's complaint about food not being enough or quantity was not enough?
Yeah,
or something?
Tom went out to review that,
So it took
and
care of
it was okay when he went out,
He
but
sent us
again,
So-
it was just, it was
Person is
reviewed.
getting enough and healthy food, that's good.
Yeah, well, and that'll be part of the discussion too.
Mhm.
We won't forget what the board said, you know, it's what they told us, the dietitian
Right.
will be reviewing those menus.
Okay.
Yeah, well, when I saw the note that Matt had asked for Kathy's resignation, and they brought on new management, and I saw that things are starting to turn around a little bit. I'm still cautious,
Sure.
we still need
No, I
to be
respect that.
careful. But I think it's only fair that since we've been hard on them, that at least I'm gonna personally let them know that I appreciate the steps that they're taking. They're showing some good faith
See?
in moving forward, and I hope that they continue in that direction.
Frequent inspection pace,
Yeah.
No, yeah.
you see?
You're right there, Casey. I'll say it, my
Yeah.
words, not the board's, my words. It's addition by subtraction. I mean, just getting that out
No, since
sends a
last,
clear message.
yeah, since last fall, we've done so many. August or September, we both went there, right?
Sure, yeah.
And
yeah,
since then, we
Yeah.
have multiple
Yeah.
inspections.
yeah, yeah.
It's true.
But you're
Riveting.
satisfied with the,
At this point I am, but I
with,
will
with
say,
the recent,
with the recent review and review and discussions, but I
Keep a
agree
watch
with-
on it.
Well, I agree with Chris, you know, with caution.
Keep on watching,
Caution.
but
yeah.
I'm concerned about the last issue that we've had as a recurring issue for multiple years. And though we might have fixed it for the short term, is it fixed for the long term?
That's gonna,
Without,
that will take continuous observation, as well as that's gonna mean if someone new moves in, there's a process to handle their laundry, their bedding, to make sure, if that's what you're talking about.
yes, I am, yep.
To make sure that
Protecting the
that
guilty
person
again.
is not bringing in
Bringing in.
any issues, and that they buy appropriate furniture and bedding and not get, another big problem would be is if you received any donated items, especially like couches and things like that, you don't, they shouldn't be doing that.
Mm.
They have complained over the years, their budget, but again, there's a point where you can't bring things in that may cause a problem. So,
Might be good to have, Mr. Sweeney on a upcoming agenda too,
I would
Just to
suggest,
kinda-
good idea.
keep him in check a little bit, or celebrate the progress.
Has he ever been physically in front of the board?
Twice,
Okay.
Oh, yeah, a couple times.
twice,
Yeah.
twice.
I know Kathy and I didn't know if he had actually come.
All right, good.
But are they been informed to keep us posted on if they change the staff?
We'll talk about that too. this
I think
week.
we should probably let them know that they need to
Well,
keep us informed that there's a
Sure,
new staff.
They
so.
did inform us,
This time, because
Sure.
there was a big issue for the past few months,
Good point.
So subsequently, if they suddenly change somebody, we need to be notified that they've done it, because this is an institution with more people there, we need to safeguard them.
No, it's like Chris said, you know.
Yeah.
Good job, but keep checking up on that.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about glyphosate.
All right, with that, thank you for that update, Mr. Oram. With that, number 7, overview of our pesticide regulations in Central Mass Mosquito Control Project. Speaking of legends, Mr. Hart, please come up and join us.
Honorary.
Yes. Why don't you, no, sit right next to Ron. He doesn't bite. No.
How are you?
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to bring Ed's Bible to him.
Yes, please bring his
But
Bible.
he does leave this here for us. This pesticide manual that he created. All your hard work, sweat, and tears.
Geez, you know, I have more to add to it, too. Gosh.
I'll bet you
Ed,
do.
it's all Ron's fault, but I thought Ron brought up a good subject.
Excuse me?
I think it's all Ron's fault that you're here tonight, but I think it was
You know
because
what
of,
it was actually a bright question by the girls that were doing that candidates forum, that
Oh, right,
that
yeah.
was, you know, it was kind of erroneously put on a list of questions, but it was really more for candidates that are going to be, running, rather than to actually be asked in that forum. But I said, well, I should probably know about this, and I don't, and, you know,
There's a
I
lot to
guess
know.
that was
about.
the impetus.
Yeah, yeah.
You have one more year to go, right?
Yeah,
You
right.
can read it now.
Yeah, right. That's gonna take me more than that to read that, that's for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot in here.
What a
That,
work that is. I breathed through it.
the first section is very easy to get through, is simple reading, and there's an awful lot of information in it that could help just about any layperson. You don't have to really be a scientist to understand what's going on in the first, say, fourth of the book. You know, there's a lot of studies in it, but there's so many studies that come out every single day. They're constantly updating information on all of these pesticides. I apologize for not talking to you sooner to get on the agenda, and perhaps in the future, I mentioned to John and the entire board that we could have another meeting soon to get into this in greater depth, because there are, like I said, there's been a lot of changes. For one thing, there's a proposed change to, I think it's section 132.6G, as far as exempted pesticides, and that is referred to in the pesticide regulation. I'm not sure if the proposed change has been approved by the state. If it has, then we might want to rethink some of the wording in this regulation too, so that it better reflects what the law of Massachusetts states. In addition to that, they make reference to, I think it's 40 CFR 152.25, which is the way that the EPA judges how dangerous a pesticide is. And the standards in that are quite, the bar is, in my opinion, has been lowered to a point where many pesticides where we would look upon them as being too dangerous, the new regulations suggest that they could be used because they're not completely prohibited. And for example, they have one qualification is there's a low dose 50 of 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight, for example. And that's considered a toxic substance. If it has a low dose 50 of 1 milligram per kilogram, then it is banned. Well, low dose 50, as scientists would know, that you take 100 laboratory animals and you feed them a certain quantity of the pesticide, and when it kills 50 of them, that's when you stop. Now, if you low dose 50 of 1 milligram per kilogram, that means a 75-pound child could eat about a teaspoon of this stuff, and 50 out of 100 would die from one. So that's a pretty low standard, because I would hope that we would be banning pesticides that were a lot less harmful than that standard. So that's why I say in our organic pesticide management, we have standards that are seemingly more reasonable and better to understand for the layperson. A lot of the tests that are done are at a level that you really have to be involved, deeply involved in the literature in order to even understand what they're talking about and how significant they are. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you tonight were, there's three things. One is glyphosate, and others are rodenticides, and the third is a proposed bylaw that I'm going to suggest that the board perhaps presents to the town meeting in the fall, and that would be to ban the use of glyphosate for residents and businesses in the town. Unfortunately, the board can't. You can regulate town property, schools, and that's what we've done. But when it comes to the entire town, that would require a town bylaw. Now, the town of Warwick did this last year, and it hasn't been challenged yet. And another thing, there's a lot involved in it. In my opinion, glyphosate is going to be severely restricted or banned for a lot of uses within 5 years. There's over 9,000 court cases against Bayer right now for the glyphosate causing mostly non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And those are brought about by people who use this on a daily basis. Sometimes they use great quantities of it. So they're exposed to it a lot more. A lot of these studies that Monsanto presented to the EPA that allowed them to use this for home use are based on studies done in 1985. And they haven't really been followed up because the government doesn't shell out money to test pesticides. They rely on the manufacturer to do peer-reviewed studies and to prevent their findings, and the EPA and the government accepts that.
I'm sorry, just so, that's a pesticide, or is that a herb?
Well, a herbicide is a pesticide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So it's,
yeah.
okay.
So I call them pesticides because like rodenticides, insecticides, fungicides, they're all
Okay,
pesticides.
okay.
Yeah.
But Ed, can I interrupt you? Because
Sure.
if Monsanto wants to come and sue me, bring it.
Yeah,
I
they
don't,
won't.
me,
They
but
won't.
we're talking about Roundup.
Right, exactly.
Okay,
yeah,
just
yeah.
so
Basically
people
Roundup.
watching at home.
Okay.
Yeah,
can
okay.
understand.
I was gonna ask.
Yeah, I
Oh,
was
I'm
gonna-
sorry,
I
okay.
was gonna ask that.
Like-
That's what I thought you were talking
Okay.
about, but
Like I say,
yeah.
when you get into this, you start thinking
Yeah.
different.
Right, but it's Roundup that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's Roundup.
And,
yeah.
you know, we talked about it tonight. I will tell you, with all of my research and my history with autism, and
Yeah.
Ed will tell you, there's a clean correlation
Oh,
between
yeah.
Roundup and autism.
Yeah, and a number of other pesticides too.
Absolutely.
KG passed on to me a later study that was done in California as a follow-up, and I was familiar with earlier studies. In fact, they're described in the pamphlet. Studies in the, I think it was the San Joaquin Valley and all the Sacramento Valley, large agricultural area. They spray pyrethroids, was the study that I read. Now, KG gave me one, there's 10 other pesticides besides the pyrethroid class. So pyrethroids are fairly safe. They'll harm cats and insects, but they don't really harm humans. And that's what the pyrethroid is, what you get in the bug spray when you buy at the store. If you want to kill a fly or a bee, that's a pyrethroid. Well, they've done studies on women that are pregnant, and I'm not sure if it's in the first or second trimester, when they spray the field, the children have an alarming statistical rise in learning disabilities, all the way from autism spectrum to ADD.
2 kilometers away. They
Within,
wouldn't.
yeah, within 2,000 meters.
So
right.
large distance it affects.
Yeah, right. And you're right, and they've noticed this for quite some time. The study that you passed me was the newer study, and it's a lot better. They really went out and they did measure distances and talked to, a lot of them were migrant workers, and they tried to follow up and find out.
I gave you a copy too.
Yeah.
Did you say it was Harwich, or did you say, is that who, Harwich?
Warwick,
Warwick?
yeah.
Now, how would they enforce, how do they enforce that? Is that?
This is interesting, Warwick, there's not that many people, I think it was 75 people at the town meeting, and this didn't pass unanimously. I read the minutes of their town meeting, and every single article passed unanimously, which is, I was like, there must be a misprint, because I can't believe all these things passed unanimously. When it came to this particular regulation, it was split. It was about 2/3 were for it and 1/3 was against it, but it did pass. And basically, they've banned it for sale and for use by residents in the town. I didn't read the regulation yet. I called the town, and because it's such a small town, I called the health agent, left a message, but they haven't gotten back to me yet. Because,
So it's the
like I
ban of
said,
in retail stores as well as.
that's what it
okay,
is.
okay.
Now, Warwick's a small town, I don't know how many they have. They may have one hardware store. But the idea was to ban it for use. Also, you'll notice in that thing, I think, that you were passed out by Laura, there's a number of states and towns throughout the country that are they're limiting it on public use like we have, but they're also trying to spread that ban into private and commercial use within the town. The EPA will tell you that no pesticide is safe. Most of the studies, and we look at them, we're thinking about adults. They're not really thinking about children or the unborn babies, the mother that bumps into this. Unfortunately, in glyphosate, it's in everything. But just everybody here has glyphosate in the system. If you were to take hair samples and test everybody, we all have glyphosate. 98% of the public that has been tested so far has glyphosate. And that's because I gave you a list of 70 foodstuffs that are sprayed with the desiccant prior to harvest. They do that, like say in a grain, they fly over with a plane, spray the fields with wheat or oats, corn, whatever it may be, with the glyphosate. It dries out the plant and makes it easier to harvest. And also, I understand it's because it's desiccant, it kills off an awful lot of the surrounding leaves, so when they're harvesting the corn or the rice, whatever it is, it's easier to just gather the product that they're looking for. It also lasts longer in the silos. But the answer is that in all of your breakfast cereals, breads, things like that, they contain some level of glyphosate. The EPA has decided that this level is so low that it's not going to harm you. But there's maybe a cumulative effect. You know, a lot of these studies, we didn't know that asbestos would harm you until, you know, people were getting cancer 30 years after they were exposed to it. Remember about lead and lead gasoline, how long it took to ban lead. Unfortunately, cigarettes. Unfortunately, it takes an awful long time and a lot of health hazards before they finally get around to banning. But the thing about glyphosate is that there's, like I said, there's about 9,000 court cases right now. They're being sued. And Harrow's, which is the largest distributor of pesticides and fungicides and fertilizers in the country, stopped selling it because their insurance company wouldn't cover them for insurance. Now, when that happens, that's the red light should go off and say, okay, when an insurance company won't cover you for liability for selling a product, then maybe you ought to think about not using it anymore. There are other ways to handle weeds, and we use them in this town. There's safer ways. This is a product that people use. They don't understand its danger. Everybody's too busy really to get involved in it, and we always assume that if the government or the regulators say it's safe, then it is safe. Or if we find out later that there was a problem, it's good to be educated and to know it in advance. And if there's other things that you can use, you protect your family, you protect yourself, you protect your neighbors, you protect the environment by acting intelligently, let's say. There's another thing too, is that a lot of people don't realize, and this study is in here, that if you have a lawn care specialist that's treating your lawn and you're using pesticides outside, the sun and the rain and the elements degrade it eventually. A lot of these chemicals go into the soils and the clays degrade them. When you carry it into your house on your shoes, your pets bring it in, your kids bring it in, it stays in the carpeting, it stays in the floors. And they've done studies finding that the concentration of pesticides inside the home is about 10 times greater than it is out in the lawn. So that gives people cause to think, and this will stay through the winter too, because there's no sun and there's no rain inside your house to degrade them. And there's
You need to come to a meeting and do a public service announcement.
There's an awful lot to
Eye-opening.
cover. I could
Yeah.
talk for hours on this subject. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one last thing, and I know you have other things on the agenda. We're in the midst of the 6th great die-off of species worldwide. And it's alarming the number of arthropods that are being destroyed. In Europe, they've been doing some studies, and an 80% decline in insects in Germany. Puerto Rico, 85%, they did some studies after the hurricane, and they found, geez, a lot of these insects that they had been studying, they're not there anymore. And it wasn't because of the hurricane. It's because of pesticides and human encroachment upon their environment in night light. We have lights on all over the place. Most of these insects breed at night, and they use the moon and the stars for navigation, and the lights screw them up. They often go to the light. And so they're not breeding, they're not interacting with each other. And the downside is that we're losing an enormous amount of insects. And they're all beneficial. Every third bite of food you have tomorrow comes in some part from a wild pollinator, not so much a bee, but a wild pollinator. And when you start decreasing the numbers of insects in nature, you create a hazard for the future that is not going to be, there's no alternative other than wild pollinators for most of our foodstuffs and plants. It affects the birds. Nature has a balance. When you interfere with that balance, it's unpredictable what the result is going to be. And so that's why I encourage people not to, you don't have to douse the woods and the fields in your backyard every single day with pesticides to kill mosquitoes. You're killing everything. There's other ways to handle mosquitoes. Now, you're going to cover this tonight. And also, you can wear a mosquito repellent rather than kill everything, because there's no lepidopterans anymore. I haven't seen an eastern blue or a sulfur or a copper butterfly in 10, 15 years. All the underwings, the spanworms, all these insects, beneficial insects, are gone. The dipterans, the hymenopterans, everything has been decreased in numbers, and it's serious, because we cannot, as a species, we can't exist without insects. They're essential. That saying that they have in advertising, the only good bug is a dead bug, is an ignorance saying. It's the same thing, the only good weed is a dead weed, is an ignorant saying. And the antidote to ignorance is education. It's different from stupidity. So anyways, I'm sorry to keep going on and on. I could go forever.
You're educating me, Sydney, this is great.
Our expert's better than everybody else's expert, isn't he?
Regulation, I think,
Isn't he?
that you
Isn't he
said
great?
you wanted to recommend?
Yeah,
Is that
it's a bylaw, and it was similar to Warwick, but I want to work on it, and I'll talk to you about it. Yeah, it's why in the future.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna introduce
Well,
that.
coming up,
Okay.
I gave it in the introduction of that that handout that you were given, you'll see the philosophy behind it, the logic. It's the wording that's important, and it'd be nice to come up with some wording that would cover more than just glyphosate, because otherwise, like chlorpyrifos, for example, is a carcinogen. It's a known carcinogen. It's banned in Europe. It was to be taken off the market in 2018 in the United States. The Obama administration banned it, and they gave Dow, I think it was, 2 years to phase it out. Well, then the new administration came in and they said, no, forget about that. That's okay. You can continue to use chlorpyrifos. Now, it's a known carcinogen. It affects children mostly. And what I had suggested was a bylaw to ban glyphosate. But it'd be nice to have a bylaw that was worded in such a way that, say, the Board of Health and the Board of Selectmen could ban any new substance that comes along. You wouldn't have to have a new bylaw every time some new danger comes to the, up on the radar, you know. I have 6 attorneys in my family. I'll discuss the language with them, and maybe at a future date, I can present it to the board. And it would be my suggestion that you sponsor this in the next town meeting. And like I said, I talked to the town manager about it, and I would expect and be very disappointed if the Board of Selectmen didn't support it. I'm sure they will, because they're just as conscious of the health of the community as the Board of Health is. You know, and I'm pretty sure that it would pass like it did in Warwick. We went on the map by being the 3rd community in Massachusetts to have an organic pest management regulation. Warwick is the 1st in Massachusetts to ban glyphosate. It'd be nice if Ashland was the 2nd. And I don't know about penalties either, you know, lots of things.
I'm just curious how you enforce, how.
It's easier to do with commercial applicators. With the townspeople, it's basically an honor system, I think, is the best way to deal with it. Let people know. Then let them make
Educating people
Yeah,
on it.
educating
Okay.
people themselves, yeah, you know. It's banned, please, we can't sell it, please don't use it, that type of thing.
This year,
What's
Assisted
there
Health
in the
Agent
yard
Park.
will affect that.
You can still get a
That's
plastic
okay.
bag, but
Good God.
like somebody else.
Yeah, right, right. And you're right about plastic bags. They ban plastic bags. You have water bans. You ban public smoking. I misstated it in a letter. It's actually in public buildings and private clubs, but you get the message.
In
I
India,
guess-
they banned even plastic straws. I went
Yeah,
down to
yeah,
get tender coconut. He said, you drink it like that, I won't give you a straw.
State of New York banned plastic bags
No
yesterday.
need to have a
Right.
straw.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so,
We're
yeah.
talking about it in Mass
Yeah.
today, too.
You know, there's one last thing I'll mention too, Mr. Chairman. You're gonna talk about mosquitoes right now. Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis is a fascinating organism. It has a plasmid in it,
I
and
know
the
that.
plasmid, it goes in it, and
know
it's
that
very
one.
specific. It goes after mosquitoes and black flies. And this is a bacterium. It's a tablet, you throw it in the water, and the bacterium goes out and infects the larva. It invades the epithelial cells of the digestive system and creates pores. Opens up a bunch of pores in the epithelial cell, allowing cellular contents to leave and water to come in. The cell bursts, the larva dies. It's ingenious. It's really amazing. I'd love to meet the people that thought this up.
But you know, it's been an honor to work with Ed over the years, and it was years ago. But I remember readily on our ball fields in town, up at the high school, the middle schools, even at Stone Park, we used to use Roundup all the time.
Yeah.
And Ed got a little bit of pushback from the DPW and then the field study committee that we had at the time. And I think after about 20 minutes, Ed thoroughly convinced people, like, no, we shouldn't be using Roundup. And it's, to your point, it's all about education.
That's right.
It's all about education.
Yep. People will make the right choice if they have the right information.
People will make
Yeah.
the right choice
Yeah.
if they have the
Yeah.
information, so.
And there's more and more education coming out on Roundup right now with the
Yeah.
lawsuits.
Yeah,
And,
and they're winning in court too. That's gonna have, like I said, the insurance companies, yeah.
Huge
Huge effect, yeah, I know,
Huge
yeah.
settlements,
282 million was one of them, yeah.
again, it's all about public's health.
That's right, that's right. And it's, you know, I worked in construction my whole life, and all the old guys always used to say, you know, the most important thing, Eddie, is keep your health. You know, you can replace anything else, but you can't replace your health, you know? And they're right, yeah. In the end, that usually ends up being our most important interest.
Well, it'll be interesting as Warwick, Massachusetts, they incorporated this as a vote of their town meeting, so it's a town
Yeah. Yeah.
bylaw.
We'll see what happens, but it's
Well,
a worthy
It'll be
fight.
interesting to see if when we did head concussions, we did it, were you on the board for that, Ed?
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we did it both. There's a Board of Health regulation
Mhm.
and a town bylaw.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to see when you keep in touch, as you always do
Yeah.
anyways, with the, where you go with the selectmen on it as well.
With your permission, maybe I'll get on the agenda at a future date. I'll gather more information and make a better presentation. This is 24 hour, actually, I started this morning, so.
That's okay.
So Mark, just to
Thank you.
educate
Thanks
myself,
for the
so
effort.
we
Okay,
couldn't
thank
do it
you.
as a
Thank you very much.
regulation, we would
Okay,
have
thanks
to
for
do it as
having
a
me.
bylaw?
No, you could do it as
See
a
you later.
regulation.
Oh, we
Okay,
could do
Chris,
it, oh,
thank you
okay,
very
I
much. Okay.
misunderstood then. I was just, I didn't know if there was a benefit
Well,
of,
what happens with a regulation, an ordinance, a bylaw
Yeah,
is sometimes more effective to not be changed without,
Yeah.
you need town meeting vote to change it.
yep,
Where if you
Right.
had a change of board members and you had people here from, say, an industry that wanted to see it removed, it could be removed.
Right, right.
So but it's the Board of Health is the most powerful board in town
Yep.
because they can create regulations. When we go that route, as the board always does, we'll invite whoever might have interest.
I was thinking a little bit more optimistic about it, I was thinking that you're saying as things change, we might wanna add to it. It would
Right.
be easier to add
yeah.
if it was a regulation than a bylaw,
It-
because what if that one product, we'll call
Yeah.
it, didn't pass?
The key
Well,
is to try to write a bylaw so it sounds like a regulation. I don't know if it can be done. I gotta think about the wording, you know.
Well, I just didn't,
Talk
that's
to
why I was
those
asking
six
to Mark, I
family
just didn't know
members.
if there was a benefit of going for bylaw versus
Yeah,
a regulation, because
It's
we could do
basically
it
a
and
removal.
change it if it needed to be.
as long as I understand from an attorney, it wasn't a member of my family, but another attorney, said that the Board of Health cannot pass that type of regulation on commercial and residences, only on town property. And it's like restraint of trade issues.
Okay,
And, but in a bylaw, at town meeting, they can.
okay,
So you can pass a bylaw, like a water ban
Yeah.
or a plastic ban, but you can, and you have a lot of power when it comes to regulations on town property, schools, things like that. But I challenge that too, because if it's,
the board just eliminated retail establishments from selling certain tobacco
yeah,
products, so
exactly,
it,
yeah, I know.
I mean, it might be worth asking council, because it
Right.
might, I mean, maybe it's just weighing out which one would be better.
I didn't get a clear answer last time when we passed the rate, because we wanted to make some things across the board. And then we were advised at the time, well, no, it won't work. So we stuck with what we knew would work. But you're right, a regulation would be a lot easier, and it's more flexible too. Because like I said, this is one. If we
Right.
Pick the big one first.
Right, and like you said,
But
if it's
there's
always changing, if a year down the road from
Right.
now,
Right, yeah. Yeah.
But it's easier in a town meeting type government to amend a bylaw though, too.
That's true, that's true.
Once the bylaw is in place.
Right.
to
then
make an
yeah.
adjustment.
You make an
Well,
adjustment.
Add to it.
To
yeah.
your point, John, I got the Warwick town meeting right here, and
Mm-hmm.
they amended it, because originally it was under the name Roundup,
Mm-hmm.
and they amended and it passed because they just wanted to change, to add the words "and glyphosate."
Yeah,
So
right,
instead of
right.
just having the Class 2-4D
Yeah,
Roundup, they
Yeah.
also added the word glyphosate.
Yeah.
And then that passed
Mhm.
33-14. I guess their town
Oh,
meetings
okay.
aren't well
So this-
attended.
yeah.
Well,
Then
see,
again, it's a small town, but it passed with
Yeah.
over 50% or
Yeah.
greater vote, then,
Yeah.
See, I was
Yeah.
thinking optimistic as well,
October
so I was thinking it's
23rd.
gonna be next spring, I'll say,
m-
before anything's, like,
Yeah.
if it goes a bylaw, by the time it gets approved, and you're talking a year from now.
yeah, you never can,
I was just
right.
thinking a regulation would be a little bit quicker
Yeah,
as well.
true.
Yeah, it
Well,
is.
Just let you know my
But that's why you
rationale.
should
Yeah, no,
shoot
yeah.
for November,
Okay.
have something for November, so
Mhm.
then by the time the
Right.
Attorney General vets it, it'll
Right.
be this time of the year.
That's why I
when
said it'll be
people-
next spring
But that's probably
Right.
perfect timing,
Yeah.
Right.
because that's
Yeah.
when people typically use that
Mhm.
product, you know, as the weeds start, you know.
But there is some logic behind the tobacco regulation. You know, you're telling vendors you can't do something. That's a restraint of trade. They could argue, but they didn't. But there's an age limit too for smoking cigarettes to start with. I don't know. It's a,
Well, I
You know,
mean,
people said we'd get a lot of
Mark, will you
pushback,
just
but
check
we
with
didn't.
council
yeah,
to
you
see
didn't,
which
yeah,
way we
I
should
know,
go?
yeah.
on this, well, I can say either way, you have the right to vote a regulation. And I
Mhm.
think it was pointed out, you can do it quicker here, you pointed out,
Yeah.
Diane. Town meeting would take longer, so I think we give Ed the opportunity to present, and
Okay.
then the board can decide. You can
Sure.
vote it as a regulation.
Sure.
I was just thinking there was one regulation
I
where
was thinking it
someone
would be a little
said
bit, yeah, just.
Mm.
we could get board members, and this is when there was a board of 3,
Mhm.
that may come on and change it on you. And
Mhm.
I forget which regulation it was, but it never did happen.
Mm.
So it's the option of the board,
Yeah.
The
in
ti-
my view.
The timing would still work though. the timing would work, because we mentioned, it's all about it's not about banning, it's
No,
about education.
it's about education.
It's about
Yeah.
education.
Well,
So, as you have these conversations to get to
Yeah.
November town meeting,
Mhm.
the public becomes more aware, that
Yep.
starts tonight with this conversation.
Mhm.
You have more and more throughout the year, then it's at town meeting, the AG vets it hopefully by, late January, early February,
Mhm.
and then you're right, and then you have, you pick up that conversation again
Mhm.
in March of next year, hey, just so you know,
Mhm.
to Chris's point, then you have to document it, cause now you're gonna have to enforce it.
I do remember now which one, it was fluoride. The board,
Fluor-
Diane,
oh,
you
okay.
remember those days? We had many meetings on fluoride,
Mhm.
and the board decided at that point to go forward
Mhm.
and let the town people decide.
Yeah.
But that's what it was, and so it's up to the board, it's your choice.
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Brandy Kinsman. I just wanted to make a quick comment. Thank you, Ed. That was a really great presentation. I just was making notes, and one of the things that kind of struck me was, as part of this and the education to the general population, make sure you kind of have like a disposal program in place,
Mhm.
because I know I have a big thing of Roundup in
Yeah,
my garage,
yeah.
and if
True,
it becomes
good idea.
banned,
Yeah, good point. Yep.
I would want to know what I can do to,
Yep.
Usually there's like a DPW, it's
Yeah.
probably coming up in the spring,
If
usually,
you
right?
include
Isn't
it,
it spring
yeah.
and
Also
fall?
hazardous waste collection.
Right, yeah.
but if that's
Yep.
part of that, that would be great.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's
Yep.
where we can let Dave Miller know that, he runs the household hazardous
Mhm.
waste program at the DPW. We can let him know, hey, there's a new law coming into place or regulation. You wanna know, you could get a lot of people coming
Right,
with
right.
Roundup. or
Well, that,
any
that
type
might
of
be the best
glyphosate.
value-added thing to the meeting tonight,
Yeah.
because if you have a big jug of Roundup at home and you've
Yeah.
watched this meeting tonight.
Mhm. What do you do with
how
it?
what do you do?
Excuse me.
You don't pour it down the drain.
Right.
You don't pour it down the sewer.
You don't want it
pour
hanging around the house
You
either.
don't pour it around the house, so I
Yeah.
think you bring a
Yeah.
very good
Yeah,
point.
it's a good idea.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Brady.
Yeah, yeah. There's one last thing too. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, and it's rodenticides. I've been talking to a man named Gary Menon. He's very active in this from Sterling. I mentioned it to Mark earlier. I'll
And
just
he
run
was
this-
the one with them AHB,
Yeah.
which I believe you saw, you went to the meeting,
Yeah.
so KG's aware of him too.
There's something people don't realize when it comes to this issue. It's kind of like a domino effect. The reason why, I'm gonna start at the end of this tale, and we'll work backwards to the beginning again. People are very, very aware of Lyme disease and deer ticks, and they're everywhere. And I was a kid, I was out in the woods all the time, I don't think I ever got a tick. Today, you go out in the backyard, you get 2 or 3 of them. The reason is because they really should name it the white-footed mouse tick, because the main vector for this insect is a mouse. It's not a deer. And the reason why we have a lot of deer ticks is because we get a lot of mice. The reason why we have a lot of mice is because we don't have a lot of raptors, and the reason why we don't have a lot of raptors is partially because of growth and rodenticides. Tufts Animal Hospital will tell you that they have raptors coming in all the time, brought in by people, an owl, a hawk or something, that is sick, and it's sick because it's ingested so many rodenticides, and the theory is they believe that almost all of them in suburban areas have rodenticide in them, because people use this as a method to get rid of mice. It's not, first of all, it's not the best way to get rid of a mouse, it's not a safe way, and it's harming the balance of nature.
What product is that?
Any rodenticide, yeah, and the rodenticides, primarily they were warfarin. And that's from the Wisconsin Agricultural Facility in Racine. That's what it's a large acronym. Warfarin actually is an acronym for this product that was discovered in Racine. A doctor told me this. He told me this whole story. My father was on Coumadin, and Coumadin is actually warfarin. And they discovered it because pregnant cows were hemorrhaging when they gave birth, and because they found this fungus, this mold that was growing in the hay, and it had warfarin in it, and they took the warfarin out, and they used it as a blood thinner. They used it as rat poison originally, and then when they realized it was a good blood thinner for atrial fibrillation, they had to change the name because they didn't want people to think that they were taking rat poison, so they changed it to Coumadin. But most of these rodenticides contain a anticoagulant. And what happens with the mouse is it doesn't die right away. It usually takes a day, a couple of days for a mouse. It could take a week for a larger animal like a squirrel, and of course it'll kill a house pet. They're colorful, they're flavored, they're designed to attract the animal. The animal gets it and it'll either hemorrhage cerebrally or in the lungs or in the digestive tract. And when it does, it's weakened, it goes outside, it's flopping around, and a raptor comes down and catches it and takes it back to the nest, feeds it to the young die, the raptor gets sick, eats a couple more, it dies. One of the mates died, the other mate leaves its territory, and now you don't have a raptor in this area. Well, mice can produce up 5 to 10 litters a year, and between 3 and 10 mice per litter. So one couple can produce 15 to 100 mice a year. So you can see how
I got my
rapidly they will grow. And the raptors eat a large number every single day. So when you get rid of the raptors, you end up with too many mice. I would encourage everybody to stop using rodenticides and find other ways to get rid of a rodent problem, if you even have one. As it's very rare in suburbia because they only come into usually old buildings. A new house, as long as there's no holes bigger than a nickel, they can't get into your house. They're not there. But anyways,
We need to
that's
talk,
another
Ed.
subject.
We need to talk.
And size of a pen, that's what we tell.
Size of a
people.
pen, oh, no kidding.
They can
Yeah.
squish
I heard a
their
nickel, but
bodies.
a pen probably.
Pen, which
even
is
better.
like a half a nickel.
Yeah.
He's
So
amazing, isn't he?
Well, maybe the next week we can get into this in greater
Well,
depth in
and
the
that's-
next meeting.
that's
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry to
I
take
I
up so
think
much.
we need to give you like a meeting agenda and you can come in and educate
See
me.
how valuable an asset he was to the board, though? Yeah.
Maybe I'll be back someday.
Yes.
Sooner than you know.
I'd like, yeah. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, thanks for
Thanks.
coming.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Eye opener.
It's scary, yeah.
It is.
Scary, scary. All right, do we need to talk about mass mosquito?
No, you
control
should
plan?
have a page that looks like this in your
Yep.
agenda book. Just advising the board, Central Mass Mosquito Control Program, which services almost our entire region. They're out right now
This is my
doing
next
larva
subject.
control applications with a very safe product, and you can read through it to see what they do. And again, they always try to incorporate IPM, Integrated Pest Management, before they need to go further with any type of spraying and so forth. And that includes dredging, tire removal. They've done a lot of tire removal for us, and they've worked with us in putting in water control devices for beaver dams. So they do, in my view, a fantastic job with the work they do.
Mark, while you were at it, Mr. Deschamps had given us a map and a spreadsheet for the water bodies in the town. If you can get an updated one from them, that would be nice to find out where things are, so that
From
if
Central
there's-
Mass.
Because the climate changes increase the
Oh, yes.
number of water bodies, so if you can find out.
Oh, I know what
That
you're
might
talking about,
help.
like for detention ponds. and-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus more
Yeah.
more constructions create more of these ponds too.
Yeah.
We have a
and-
lot more groundwater this year than we've had in years past, too, so.
Especially the large bodies, that's where, if you keep it quiet, then you
Yeah.
have more mosquitoes breeding there, so you
Right.
need to.
Megan did send out a map overlay, so I'll see if that shows some of those new detention ponds and so
Oh,
forth.
okay. She didn't copy us, we'll find out why.
Oh, I'm sorry, Megan, I
That's
got you
okay.
in
Not a
trouble.
problem, not a problem.
She was sending it to staff just to give us a tool.
She'll
I'm
probably
sure
send
you'll
it to-
see it on
I'm sure
conservation.
someday she will send it to us.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
All right, so moving on to item number 8, and we are update on the Eversource Project Public Forum. Rob Shear was here tonight. Thank you to Rob for joining us for the Mary Mortensen presentation tonight. Thought it was nice that the chairman of the Board of Selectmen took time out of his busy schedule to come. But he actually pulled Ron and I aside and talked a little bit 2 weeks from today in this room, evidently. So we'll have to talk about that even from a meeting schedule standpoint. The Board of Selectmen want to have with Conservation and invited the Board of Health as well, to talk about the Eversource project in the public forum. But you could probably update most
Yes.
of us on what's going on.
We had a meeting on the 25th, it was publicly advertised, and then there were lots of people here, there were lots of questions. And they represented their project to the public, because they had done it previously, there was not that gathering, so now they gave a better view, so they're going to come back later. We have selected a peer review, Lucas Engineering, and then they will do a study for us, not only the habitat study as well as the look at the wetland issues there, and they'll let us know. And whatever they are proposing, they'll go through the review and then call us back. Maybe it'll take another 2 or 3 weeks for them to come back and report to us. The other thing that I found was there is apparently a section of the pipe, I don't know exactly what location it is, it's above the ground. So that's, some of the members in the Concom thought that there's a public danger if there is an issue with it, or somebody hits with the rocks and then things open up.
It's not currently underground, but the new proposal is to.
No, the existing one itself is there exposed, it's been there for past 10 or 15 years.
Where's that?
It used, I don't know exactly the location, but it is on the track, wherever it is, it's in Ashland. It used to be covered, but it's exposed now.
Huh.
And apparently, they claim that there is a federal law that permits them to keep that exposed. So I have sent in a question asking them what that law is, whether who makes the decision to expose it, whether they make it or somebody else in our town says, okay, for this law, you're allowed to do this. So I just
There's
haven't
a
gotten
law in
there.
the books on that?
That's what they claim, that they can expose, they're allowed to expose some section of it. I don't know how much what, I don't know what guidelines they use it, so I've asked them to get me the regulations specifically. As well as I've asked them who makes the decision, who makes a call.
If you haven't found it yet, I
I
dare
haven't
say it
found it.
doesn't exist.
No, it does exist because they made a public statement, so it should be existing.
Well, a lot of people say stuff in
And there-
public
there
that's
were-
not true.
Call 'em on,
there was
KG,
another,
call 'em
Come
out
on,
on it.
KG.
Have you ever watched the news?
Carl brought up another issue that, they probably overlooked the deeds or the taking document that they had over 80 or 90 parcels, which clearly says that they can only have one pipe underground. So they're trying to keep the old one and put the new one there so that violate that one, so that they have to think back and look all the 96 taking
Well,
documents.
can you
from-
find that? Can you make that?
Carl has found it.
The law, okay.
No, not the law.
No, the law, I'm talking
law-
about the
No,
law.
I've asked them to give it.
I'll argue all day with you the interpretation of the law, but if you can find the law, yeah.
I've asked the vendor to give it to us, so if they know where the law is, they should tell us.
Well, we should make them.
So hopefully they will come back with it.
And then we got an update from Megan as well on the,
Yes.
and you guys all saw that in your packet. Laura was nice enough to ask, our conservation agent to give us an update. But I think it's important that we be at that forum. Do you guys wanna post for that meeting, 2 weeks from today on the 16th?
As far as I know, it's a tentative, though.
Rob was pretty emphatic of asking me tonight to make sure that we let people know that it is, so.
Okay.
And only because he's the chairman of the board of selectmen, I was like, oh, okay, if that's what you want, but. Dude, would you guys wanna attend that and then
Yeah.
meet afterwards, or just use that as our meeting? Do we have anything pressing for the 16th?
Not that I know of. Not that I can do, Laura, do you know of any pressing issues?
No?
That would be our regular date.
Right, that's what I'm saying, yeah. Well, we hypothetically wouldn't be able to meet here anyway, so,
So we
yeah.
just go downstairs.
We could- If we had anything to come up, so,
Yeah, we could do it beforehand.
you wanna do that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Would 6:30 be the time you wanna post?
Probably a good idea. Could everybody be here by
6:30?
6:30?
Sure.
6:30?
Oh, I also sent
Downstairs, BC.
another,
Check the tower.
And then we
document
go
about the
upstairs.
leak
They-
today by email
they would
to all of you.
Oh, the gas leaks.
Yeah. Statistics, numbers.
Shocking.
I was just gonna say, that was a little,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
Yeah,
Again,
those
eye-opening is
leaks
the
can
word, isn't
cause,
yeah.
those gas leaks can cause dead trees on the pipelines which are close to it.
That's the people in Lawrence and Andover and.
Yeah, this topic, this entire statistics of gas leak was a topic on all those MHAB studies last year.
I found it interesting.
A doctor from Harvard was one who gave all the stuff, and then she had given a link for clickable, where you can click and find out which town has more, what they have, and then expand on it.
Right, Diane Gianni making me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm just about, you guys can continue meeting.
All right, health agent report, we kinda talked about the budget.
Yeah,
Is
we
it-
did, and just to let the board know, our finance director has been updated on our nursing line item, and she is moving $2,500 to that line item from contracted services. Contracted services, there was an amount taken out for reverse 911. That's been changed to some degree, so we'll have enough money in that line item to 10%. I told her we use reverse 911 about 10% of the time when you look at the other departments. And so we should be able to make it through the end of the year with that change. And that's pretty much the other line items are fine. It's always been the nursing line item. Any questions? No? The next one's Nyanza, 5-year.
Only thing is, why is the 911 belongs to, let's go to the police department and have them pay for it.
Well, they divide it into 4 departments: police, DPW, clerk, and Board of Health. Police and clerk use it most. DPW too, on
Okay.
trash collection being a day late or whatever, snowstorm.
We don't use it.
No, West Nile virus is when we use it. We notify the neighborhood of concern and so forth. We
good
may
that we don't
start,
do
we may start using it. We asked Ed Berman, who helps to direct that program, to see if we could get a list, place all our food establishments on a list. And then you can circle it, so if you have a power outage, say on the west side of 135, you can just circle it, and it will just call those food vendors to say, you know, we got a power outage,
Right, right.
keep us in a loop. Nyanza, 5-year review and process. EPA is doing their 5-year review. Part of it is to interview staff. They interviewed me last week, they being two people, Lisa Thuat from EPA, and there was another person there that does this interview. The interview is to make sure that they're communicating appropriately with our department. And they're gonna meet with the Nyanza Advisory Group as well. And I told them I've not in any way had any trouble. I told Lisa, truly appreciate her, one voice, one person to answer the question, so there's no confusion. And I told her I'm very happy with their performance. I had nothing to say bad about their performance. They've been very open, very clear. They've gone through some challenging times
They've been
as
very
well.
prompt in responding too.
Yes, oh yes, I told them I was very
Even
satisfied.
to Concom, they've done it.
Yep, so that's what we did. We sat down and reviewed that. Future vaccination
Oh,
clinic.
can I just,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry to
I'm
interrupt you
just
there.
trying to go fast. I
No, because,
apologize.
something important. Not that I'm counting the seconds, but as you know, I'm leaving this board, and one of my appointments from the board is the Nyanza Committee. The Nyanza Committee is meeting with the EPA on,
April 28th, is it?
I believe it's April what is it? Hold on.
I don't remember.
What is it?
I can-
Thursday, March 28th. March 28th.
No,
which is-
April, we're in April.
Excuse me, April.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, April 28th. They're meeting with somebody. I will actually be out of town, so it might be good tonight that somebody nominate one of you four to, one, take over that position, because they're probably gonna have a couple meetings between now and the fall.
Yeah.
So you might wanna replace me on the Nyanza Committee, because the Board of Health does have a seat at the table.
I was gonna say,
For
is
that.
it physically at the table, like,
It's physically at the table, yep, it's an appointment. So,
I'd be willing to do it, if nobody else wanted it.
I nominate Diane to
So-
sit on the
Yeah,
name.
we need to put it, because that was not part of the agenda, we need to put it next meeting, so we do
Okay.
that.
Oh, yeah,
Do that.
true.
16th meeting will do that.
we will do that.
Yeah, I do.
And you will, then, of course, it's easy for you, but you will also have to get sworn in by the town clerk before you can attend
Right,
that
but
meeting.
I mean, I could attend the meeting just as a guest, and then after
It-
your term has ended, right, because you.
I won't be at that meeting, so that's why I'm thinking it might be a
Okay,
good idea
just-
to
Okay,
give you the voting authority at that meeting, because I won't be at that meeting, unfortunately.
all right, I guess we'll,
So the intention would be to do, okay,
okay,
Right.
so next agenda,
all right.
Thank you. Good,
Sorry to
good,
interrupt.
no, good point. We talked about future vaccination clinics and that Nancy is working on preliminary needs. The main item was a freezer, and there's the freezer right here that I looked up, nice little small freezer. Diane and Beth were trying from economic development, I was gonna call it Donnelly again, poor Beth.
You already have it.
They were trying their best to get us a freezer.
we need to
and
get
it just
approved,
didn't.
an approval process to actually do, so,
Oh.
she has other things she needs to do.
Beth Reynolds, I'm sorry, I called her
No,
Donnelly
I'm
last.
talking about Nancy, she has to
Oh.
get approved to.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was just
So can
correcting
we,
my thought process.
I mean, I had a conversation with her, which was a very good conversation with her, because it seems like I wanted to know that it wasn't anything personal, just based on a conversation that we've had here about our priority list. It seems like every time I talk to Nancy, she thinks I don't like vaccination clinics, and that's not the case. So I explained to her when we met back when, we had a list of things to take off of Mark's list, so forth. What I would like her to do is move forward with that next step to get approved for the state. So, I mean, I think she is, I wanna
She
make
is
sure
working
that.
on that.
Okay,
yeah.
I just wanna make sure it's, so to speak, on the
Yeah.
record, because I think that's the next step. We could buy a fridge, we could buy, but I think.
We have a
need to-
couple of challenges, doctor's orders. We have to work to see, right now, the school's letting us use their doctor, because fortunately our doctor passed. But some of it's easy, some of it's
Yeah.
just getting that freezer and working on the paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork with it too, but again, we are at least starting to work on it. And hopefully and with the school department as well. So we'll see where that goes. Maybe Framingham, if we regionalize, they can just do it where they've been doing it, but they have said no to it, so that's why Audrey LaCroix, the head school nurse, feels the pinch.
And
we're
was gonna
trying
say,
our best.
I know I'm a broken record about it, but I just feel that if there's, it's kinda like the regulations, it's like if there's a need, we should try to do things sooner than, because I'm assuming that regionalization, I mean, that's gonna be well in our future,
yeah.
it's not gonna be, so if there's a need and we keep talking about it, we need to move forward now, not later, so that's where
I
I'm.
agree, that's pretty much why she's prepping it. It's just a matter of if we start doing it, where's the funding coming from?
Well, we could get approved to do it and just not, I mean,
Well, we
could get
need,
approved.
well, the nurses, that will be part of it, will be the school nurses, and they want to be paid, you know?
No, not that aspect, I mean, to back up, well, the department needs to get approved to the state for clinics, they have to certify
Yes,
us before
yeah,
we can even get to
exactly.
that
That's what
point.
she's working
So if
on.
we can get that certification, we'll be ready to go, and we can figure out the other things as we go, so we're ready, so we'll just. wait.
Exactly, and that,
Right.
we're on the same,
Okay.
we're on the same lines, yeah, and that's what she's working on.
I just wanna make sure the fellow board members are on the same page too,
Yeah,
okay?
Makes perfect sense.
And then hopefully, you know, it'll come to fruition, and whatever resources are needed outside of what we were able to gather with the budget we have, we'll get some input from management, that would be nice. And they offered some input today, you know, but like Diane said, regionalization, that's gonna be a lot longer than happening overnight, so. Next item is, any questions on that, any further? Okay, next, cultural community health and safety framework. It was a good session, it was looking at framework, it was offered by Decisions at Every Turn, and what they offered was a 2-day session. I went for pretty much 3/4 of a day, it couldn't commit to 2 days. It was more or less messaging and leadership, and making sure when you're messaging, like, it's okay to drink versus drinking is not a good idea, and they were training us how to message, and it could be used in public health as well, as we message, say, Roundup. You know, how do we message that to the public? So I took all the information they had, and it'll come in the future, will come in handy, and it was very important. The 3 important things were leadership, integration, and communication, which we deal with all the time, but this was more tailored towards school messaging to some degree, because it was offered by Decisions. But they wanted all the staff, if we could attend, because it can be used in different aspects. So, any questions on that at all? No, okay. The next one, the marathon preparedness, I'll be preparing with the safety departments. Our Medical Reserve Corps chairman will be helping us out too, as we get ready to set up shelters with the Red Cross at both of our schools that we utilize, I'll leave it at that. And it's, the whole purpose of the shelters are for the runners. So if we had a tornado, I don't wish that on us, but, or anything like that, or disruption, man-made or natural, that we're ready to get a whole group of runners, and I think they run at 5,000 to 6,000 a group, into a school. And then they would be transported to the train and into Boston by bus to the train stop to. So there's mechanisms in place for that, as well as communication. And ironically, 2 years ago, we had a fire on the marathon route, so we were fortunate to be the school that was closest to it, and the runners were yelling at us, look up, and so smoke going up. So we were able to help in that respect too. But it's a very important aspect of the marathon now. In fact, today I had a train on using what we call GETS. GETS is a government emergency telephone service, and I'm allowed to have it because I have to get on the circuitry when it's busy. So if all our circuits are busy, you can't get through a phone call, all the safety people and the health department and Red Cross have the opportunity to go on this separate circuit meant just for our communications. So because when a catastrophe happens, everyone gets on the phone at once, and then you have no way to communicate. So I've done that already, and I'll be meeting with the various safety departments next week.
Yep. Michael Garnick, I saw him at the volunteer breakfast. He said he wanted to come to the Board of Health meeting one of these days, so.
Yes, he was in
Talk to him
today.
and
He
get him-
just got
Get him
back.
on future
Yep.
meetings sometime,
Okay.
so
I'd
that
like
the
to get
people
him
know who
before
he
John
is.
leaves.
Keep a look on your face.
Yeah, I think that would be nice, KG, and I'll make, can you make a note for me,
Yeah.
just so, it'd be nice to have him here before John leaves, I think, and just to give an overview of what he's done. He just got back from a national conference,
Okay.
so he can provide us preparedness information from that conference.
I was very anxious to come, because I was at the
Yeah, he's,
volunteer breakfast and he was
Yeah, he
sitting
was
next
oh, you
to me.
saw him there too? Yeah, he's
Great
great.
guy.
We're very fortunate to have
Yeah,
Mike.
yeah, yeah.
Mark, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
just a
no,
quick
no,
question.
please.
Are there any other medical resources that are offered through town funding or services? Or is that, or the other, let's say if there's, Red Cross or ambulances,
Yeah, so what happens, Red Cross doesn't do any medical, they're there to help us with sheltering and manage a
Okay.
shelter. But along the whole route, we have fire departments from all the area communities, our department, the Army. It's quite an and even prior to the races, quite a bit of observation that happens. So it's amazing the work that goes into the marathon for preparedness for any natural or man-made
It
issue.
goes in a marathon scale.
It sure does.
Yes.
But no, good question, because a lot of people think, Ron, I'm glad you asked that question, because we stand at the front of the school and they see the Red Cross. We had 2 people come to us, and in our after-action report, I mentioned it to the safety officials. One had a bad leg and he couldn't run anymore, and the other person was experiencing chest pain. And we had a police officer there, a sheriff's department, because they get a bunch of people all over, but we had no medical. And they thought the Red Cross was medical, and so, but unfortunately, we had to get them down the sidewalk, and the other person with the heart, we had him sit in the car until we could get a vehicle. It's hard to get vehicles between us and the next station, which is further down, about a quarter mile.
Yep.
So they're working on someday getting smaller, like golf carts, to come up the side of the road if the runners are still coming down. Because the person with the heart problem, we couldn't transport right away, so it created an issue that needed to be addressed, so they're working on things like that.
yeah. I mean, I know there's medical tents at the end. I just didn't know if you needed a few miles in.
Yeah, we unfortunately didn't have the medical people we needed at that school, but again, that wasn't our purpose. The medical tent was, from us to the medical tent it was down in the Stone Park area.
Okay.
It was a hall, considering where we were. I'm trying to disguise the schools. I don't think I should make it public the schools we use for sheltering. Let's see, where was I? Alcohol policy discussion update. Basically, we had one of our final meetings on alcohol policy, and the entire leadership in town was invited to the one in January, and this was a follow-up. And what it comes down to is that, ironically, it was mentioned earlier tonight that we look at tips and other programs for tobacco. Well, we were reversing it at that meeting. We were saying there's a lot of operational inspections that we do for tobacco that aren't done as often for alcohol, and not just Ashland, this is several communities. So we're kind of reversing the thought process. Maybe they can adopt some of our good ideas on more comprehensive inspections. They're also known as stings, but we don't like to call them that. We call them comprehensive inspections. So that way, everyone stays in touch with the reality that there could be someone walking in underage, and if you serve them, you gotta face the consequences. No different from what we do in alcohol. So that was the main theme, and looking at other ways. NIPs were brought up. Unfortunately, NIPs are a problem as it is, never mind with the pollution, but people drinking while driving and all that, and just different ideas that could be utilized. But at the same time, some of the educational programs, such as TIPS, was brought up to benefit the tobacco. So it was already being discussed at that level.
In that regard, there was a question, one of the vendors here apparently had served somebody who had a mask on, so we were not sure whether the underage or overage, because he had a mask on, so nobody would know who the ID is.
Yeah, it
And
was during Halloween,
that was
wasn't it?
established, I don't know whether they corrected their permit forms. I had called you about it.
From what I read in the paper, it sounds like they had some consequences
No,
to the whole issue.
not for that. The food
Oh.
permit forms should also show the same owners.
That
was the one
I'm
that-
sorry, you had me into something
No, no,
else.
no.
Yeah, well.
I know where you're coming from,
Okay.
okay, yes, no, and that's true, we're
Right.
working
Leave it
on
on
that,
that.
yeah, no,
Framingham's been very aggressive recently with alcohol.
and they were at the meeting as well, so, it's important.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, next, Green Up Ashland, I already gave the updates on that, thank you, John, for allowing me to do
Yep.
that prior. And public health emergency preparedness, we're going through our next phase of funding. So the last meeting I attended, a lot of it was on funding. Problem was, is just like with our agendas, they didn't post it. We had to have our concurrence vote at that meeting, so we need to meet again. But some of the items that are going to be interesting is how the funding gets distributed. They usually start with a base for every city in town, and right now we incorporated Region 4B. It used to just be 4A, which surrounded 128. Now we take all the communities except for Boston inside 128. And we're gonna continue to discuss how to go about that. You know, every town we get a base, but what has been occurring is you get funding also by the population. And some of the smaller towns feel a little bit slighted from that, I guess is the right word. But it's still up for grabs, and we haven't made a final vote, and it's just not us making the vote. There are at least, I'd say, several of the regions, I had them all here, but once the vote comes about, I'll let the board know, and there's a lot of paperwork on it, but again, it's not decided yet, and if that money we usually put towards preparedness, medical reserve corps. And anything else? Nope, that's pretty much it.
Nice job. Any
Thank you.
questions? Very thorough report. Item 10, review of minutes from our March 19th, 2019 meeting. Does the board want to take any action?
Yes, I'm all set with it, I have no problem, unless somebody has some changes.
I just have, I mean, I wasn't here at the meeting, but just I believe we usually go by chairman, not person, right?
I believe, and Mary never, you were here, Mary never had a problem one way or the other.
Yeah,
But
but I
we
think
had
everything
board
else is
we-
chairman, right?
Well, we had a board person that, see, I said person, that wanted a chairperson, woman, chair. Whatever it was,
I just
we've
wanna
had
make sure
different,
everything's consistent.
each board member has their own say in the matter, I guess.
Chairwoman.
Yeah, so
she wanted a
it
chairwoman.
depends on the member. So whoever the chair is, I think it should be their prerogative on what they want, you know, if they want chairwoman or chairman or
I don't wanna make a big
chairperson.
deal out of it at 9:30, we'll talk about it later.
What would you like it to be?
I'm just gonna leave it for right now.
Okay.
I change it every time we do a set of minutes, so.
Okay.
Are they different every time?
No, it just says chairperson every time.
Okay, okay.
I just wanna make sure it's consistent, because
Chairperson.
I thought that was the case too. That's why I want to make sure
I
we're
just
consistent.
wanna make sure, we've talked about it before,
I think you bring up a great point. It needs to be consistent.
I guess you have everything chairperson.
I know some
Fine.
people don't like being called chair, because they're not a chair.
I
they're-
get called a lot of things.
I don't, you can leave it, that's fine.
If there are no other corrections, I make a motion that we approve the March 19th, 2019 minutes of the meeting as presented.
Second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I'm abstaining.
Abstain?
I wasn't here either.
Okay. So that's a 3-0-2. We talked about future.
Yeah.
Wait, you were here,
I thought that was the meeting I wasn't here.
Oh, you were here. Come, you were happy that the meeting ended soon. You kidding?
Oh, that was the, I'm sorry. Aye.
That's because this one's going longer, that's why.
No.
I'm tired, I'm sorry.
There is only,
I thought it was the meeting.
there was only one meeting where there were only 3 members that attended in this entire 1 year.
I'm so glad you keep track of it.
I do.
Only because you know I don't want to have to do the inevitable. Why don't you make a motion to rescind what we just did and then make
Oh,
a new motion?
okay. Amend the motion again, or restate the motion that we approve the minutes of the meeting of March 19th, 2019 as presented.
Second.
I'll second the amended motion.
Second. Further discussion on the amendment? No? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
One abstention.
Still an abstention, all right. We don't want any,
I still wasn't there.
Sure.
You were not there. I looked at that immediately.
all right, so we talked about posting for 6:30 for downstairs and then joining the public forum for Eversource on the 16th. And then
19.
19th, no, 16th, is it? 16th, 2 weeks from today, right?
Yeah.
Mean the 16th? Yeah,
And
16th.
when is the May meeting?
The May meeting would be,
Second, I believe?
No.
No,
be
seven.
May 8th, right?
Eight.
May
Oh,
8th.
wow.
Well, the fourth is Saturday, right?
It's this,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sunday, fifth,
Oh,
sixth,
that's right.
seventh.
I should know the dates in
Must
May.
be the seventh.
Yeah.
7th, May 7th.
Yeah, it
7th
must be
May.
the seventh.
And 21st, we don't have a meeting because that's the election day.
It's election day, yeah.
21st of May is election?
Correct. And subsequent to
Late,
that,
yeah.
when will be the first meeting?
That's up to this board, and I don't know what you want to do.
After that?
Yeah.
would be
I'm
the
asking because I'm
28th?
taking off. That's why I want to make sure that
Oh, the
I'm.
28th, right? That's when it's the normal.
No, because you,
Well,
first
the
and
20
third. right?
First and third, we'll be
First and third.
competing for the room with the ZBA.
They don't meet on the 4th.
They don't? Okay, I thought they were second and fourth. No,
The election's on,
Oh,
we're the first and
21st.
third.
oh, right, so it would be the.
It's late this year.
right,
21st.
but that's what I'm saying is we wouldn't,
What day are elections?
Can't meet on the
21st.
right, so we'd have to meet the 28th.
I'm not here, but it's okay. You can have
Unless
the
they
meeting.
No, that's fine, we'll,
No,
You
but
can have the meeting. That's
Or
not
you
my-
can go to June, just
No,
wait till
June.
June.
June also is a problem for me because I'm
Oh,
going to be away
okay,
till
well.
June 11th. So I just want, it's not that I don't want to be, I wouldn't want it to be included, but if you're having it, that's fine. If you're not having it, that's
we
fine.
could meet another night that week,
Yes.
But that will be the first meeting to have an election also for the new board.
right.
So have it as soon as possible for yourself.
Just make sure whoever the new members are, that they get appointed right away by the clerk. That's, I know that was an
They usually get it done the next day.
Yeah,
anyway, so.
she pushes it now. It was an issue
Well, if we have a
once.
meeting posted, we would just let
Yeah.
them know, but,
Yeah.
Get sworn in.
It'll be up to you to post it, because my resignation is midnight on the 7th. So it'll be,
well, I mean,
You'll
I
have
could
to
do
do it.
another night. Are you gone that whole week? Well, I was gonna say we could talk.
I'm gone from 22nd May through 11th of June. You guys go ahead and have the meeting, so don't wait for me.
Yeah, well, we should look in that on the,
All right, well, we can talk about it
Next
later, right?
Yeah,
At our
we
next
can.
we
meeting.
can talk about it on the 16th.
Yeah.
Gives you 2 weeks to figure it out.
well, we could do it that one too.
All right. Any other things? Anything we missed?
It's almost summer.
This,
Good?
no, it was just with future, I guess it's not gonna happen next time, but I think just as a board, we should just review kind of, what Mike said. He said some pretty specific things that I think he's looking for us to do, just so, we're kind of all on the same page and we can figure out how to best present to him, I think what and he said, kind of like just when I was, he said, come up with
Outcomes,
your top 2 or 3 things.
Right.
He's gonna really want us to say, can't do everything, so, what are the 2 or 3 things, and really concentrate on that, and then figure out a way how to justify that as best as we can, so.
Well, and I agree with you that I felt like that we did a lot of work, and it didn't unfortunately go anywhere. That's why I was asking about the regionalization. I haven't sat here as a board member and dealt with that.
Yeah.
I just don't, I think we collectively could do a lot of work again. I just don't know, I just don't want us to do all that work and I'm going, oh, wait, we're regionalizing and,
I do think that there's work that should be getting done along the way, so there's not
Typical,
extra, just
right.
in simple metrics, like I was talking about those numbers before, right? We should be able to, at any given time, know last year how many inspections were done and how many hours are spent doing them total, right? So then we can have an average time per inspection. And that kind of helps factor in the ones that may take a little longer than some others and stuff like that. And then use that as kind of a baseline.
right.
Correct.
And we have a baseline from 2 years
My
now.
short review of the inspection papers, of the permit papers, there are no indications of when it started, when it ended, so that used to be there on the handwritten form, the
Well,
yellow form that you used.
You're
So
right.
we need to put that in there on this process. I'm sure
But then-
all the forms have the ability to edit
But
and
then there's
do
more
that.
time to send a report to the vendor.
You know what, we
So
don't
we-
have to get that fancy.
No,
right?
no, it's not
If-
that
if-
fancy. The thing is that we know
Yeah.
how well it's done, because we need to quantify it in terms of
I
saying how
agree with
much
you.
it takes.
If we had that, it's great,
It's a-
right? But if we know,
It's
that,
possible to get that, because the old forms, they used to handwrite it, and the computer form should have the ability to have that.
if we know that Tom put 17 or 15 hours in, right, and did 25 inspections, we know how long each
It's
inspection
quantifiable.
took approximately, right? So even if we have a rough estimate, that's,
Well,
that's
and-
better than nothing.
Yeah, but
You know what
I'm
saying?
also and I think maybe it would be healthy to have another one of the meetings that we had downstairs, just to sit around the round table and just go over things.
Sure.
But I think because we all seem to be like seeking it, and we would know how many hours he works in a month. And if we know how many inspections, we could just calculate, I mean, everybody has a different grasp on the figures, so if we try to compile them slowly versus all at once, maybe that would help as well.
Yeah, of course.
So maybe if we just did, maybe if Tom did a monthly report, this is how many inspections I did, we clearly know how many hours in general he works, and then just kind of look at it and just stay on it, maybe that would help. You know, it's just a thought.
Well, Mark, we're supposed to provide this annual report for the DPH every year, the summary
Yeah,
of
last
inspection.
year, they didn't
They probably
require it.
didn't, but what we should make sure in the future is that we should take a discipline of our own selves, at least, instead of making a report to them, make a report to us, so that way we have the data at least.
And don't forget,
It's only a one-page report, it's not much, it's only need to calculate the total number of inspections,
Yeah.
the things, it's statistically, it should be easy for you to
But
do.
don't get bogged down, I mean, the data, I agree, 1,000%, the data is important, but don't forget our meeting with Human Resources. The story is the important part that the data enhances. It's not data.
Correct.
Because
Like,
even Mr. Herbert said it
now,
tonight.
I could only go back to the 2 years data that I had to tell them that
How-
we're not
How
there.
do you affect people? He said it himself
Because
tonight.
once you have
How
numbers,
do-
I think they believe
How
you.
do you affect it? Exactly. It's the qualitative part, yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's,
I think
the
we should have
story,
a follow, we
the
can have
story.
a follow-up meeting, maybe just to.
Definitely.
All right, I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you and good evening.